Good evening and welcome to the Jinn&Tonic show on the 7th of June, 2019. Apologies for the late start. We've had a little bit of technical issues in terms of getting ourselves launched and working and so forth here. But we're here now, so that's all good. Welcome to all the viewers and welcome to my co-panelists, Stop Spamming and Thunderous. Good evening, guys.
Hi guys.
Hi
You
everyone.
said
Sorry
that
we're
you're
late.
going to go away now. You need to sort something, and then just when I'm starting, you say, "No, I'm." Okay, today is going to be a chaos show. I can see that. It's going to be fun. Okay, now he's gone.
No, I'm back here. I'm still here. Good evening to everybody and salam from Israel there, David. If you want to join us with your Muslim perspective, we're on Surah 3, verse 1, and it's a classic starting point. So we are dying to hear the Muslim explanation for this, and we'll be sharing that shortly after a few messages from my co-panelists, and I will join you again in a few moments.
Hi everybody. Glad everyone's here and listening to the show. I'm sorry that we're running a little bit late.
Yeah, this is quite weird because I could not start it, and then Rob managed to start it on the Mac, and then when he started it on the Mac, I wanted to join. This didn't work, and it was only when I changed browsers to Opera, so Google Chrome did not allow me to join a Hangout, a Google Hangout on Google. So this is quite weird. Anyway. Welcome to the Gin&Tonic show. I hope there's going to be some more Muslims because I've been doing some advertising on a Facebook group, Teach Me or Learn Islam or something like that, where I've told people, look, what we're doing is we're reading the Quran and we are providing our own tafsir. And this got, it's like throwing the cat amongst the pigeons because a lot of people were very interested to hear that non-Muslims are providing a tafsir. So they were shocked. So it could be that there's going to be a couple of people that are going to be here today. I see we haven't even started and we've already got one dislike. Excellent going. It shows how afraid Muslims are of anybody that scrutinizes the Quran or in any way investigates Islam. It seems that Islam and the Quran, this is so weak that it can't handle the slightest bit of criticism. So as soon as you criticize anything in Islam or Quran, it immediately fails. And somebody in this group in this Islam group on Facebook actually said, "My presence there alone is shaking his deen, his faith." So just because a non-believer is there, this already is enough to make him quiver in his boots. So that is quite a weird concept. Anyway, we don't do anything. We don't bite. We address Islam and that's all. We don't attack, we critique. And we only use facts and reality. This is the Gin&Tonic show. So what we do is we condemn categorically any abuse, oppression, slavery, violence, misogyny. We condemn categorically anything like that. And we can say that definitely for sure we condemn anyone, and it doesn't matter who it is, who in any way, and it doesn't matter what time or under what circumstances, performs any kind of a sexual act on a 9-year-old girl. I condemn this categorically, and I think everybody on the Gin&Tonic show will. But there are millions, tens, hundreds of millions of Muslims who will not be able to do that. And that is
1.7
something we
billion.
address. Sure.
So when you say hundreds of millions, it's actually 1.7 billion humans that will not condemn it, because if you're going to be a Muslim and claim Muhammad is your prophet and Allah in the Quran says that he's your role model, then 1.7 million humans will not challenge Allah's statements on that fact.
Okay, number one, I don't believe the 1.7. I think it's more like 1.2. The second thing is I don't trust those numbers at all because I know how they were collected because I've gone through the Pew conditions to, when they explain everything. And the other thing is we need to acknowledge that not all of Islam is Sunni. Less and less Muslims are Sunni because they feel like the Sunnah is letting them down. A lot of Muslims are saying that what makes Islam so bad, so violent, so misogynistic, and so totally, void of any, I don't know what you call this, justification for an existence. today in the 21st century is the sunnah, because this is where you learn things about like dipping the fly in your drink and things like that. So this is why people are abandoning this. So we have so many different branches of Islam. We have thousands of different flavors of Islam. So to take the complete ummah, this I don't know, this is this entity of all the Muslims together, I don't think it works anymore. There are more and more Muslims who are cultural Muslims, who will fast, who will pray when they feel like it. I mean, come on. If you go to the Middle East, a lot of people don't pray, definitely not 5 times a day. They go to the mosque on a Friday, yeah, sure. But during the week, no, not really. They don't have time. We're working. And come on, there's a lot of people. If you're a pilot and you're a Muslim and you're on final approach, you don't go and you pray. You land the aircraft. You don't have time for things like these. And that's the way it works. It's It's reality. That's what.
And I think it's fair to say on that, stop sign, if people are going to sort of like just go to prayer on a Friday, which for all intents and purposes sounds more like a social gathering of the community than it is to worship their God,
Correct.
then it's fair to say that if Islam is defined by the Quran and the Hadith, and even if you just want to be a Quranist only, which you have no basis for, let's be generous and assume that, and you don't follow what the Quran says, and you only go to prayer on a Friday, and it's more of a social event for the community, then in fact you are not a Muslim by definition, and that's by the definition of the Quran itself. So you may as well give up the title of being a Muslim, because you're not one.
They define it themselves. They define themselves as being Muslim, and they define what a Muslim is. So this part and parcel of accepting the Sunnah is not part of every Muslim.
But
That's why.
surely Allah defines what a Muslim is, not the Muslim, because Allah, the whole point of Islam or any religion is objectiveness. It is an objective standard, an objective set of rules, not subjective.
Yeah,
So
but this is the point. Allah doesn't talk to anybody.
He's telling them Muhammad's a role model. He's telling them that if you don't worship me, you will go to hell and have fresh skins every time they're burnt.
Yeah, but then at the same time, he says, don't go and follow anything except the Quran.
Absolutely.
So you have well, this is a dichotomy, okay? Because on the one hand, it says, well, you need to have the Sunnah from the Prophet. You need to follow the Prophet. So everything the Prophet says goes. But then on the other hand, it says, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're only supposed to follow the Quran. The Quran is the highest, and the highest rule and law of the land and everything. And if anybody says anything different, then just go to the Quran. If it contradicts the Quran, it's null and void.
But
There's a contradiction.
I totally is. Islam, by anyone's estimation, with any form of intelligence, and in my opinion, you'd have to be stupidly perverse or hopelessly ignorant to say otherwise. But Islam stands on two legs, and it's an equal footing. The one leg is the Quran, and the other leg is the Hadith. You cannot get away from Islam without the two. The two are like the left and right, the up and down, or the north and south. They are opposite but together. One is the word of God, and the one is the word of its prophets. And that's how Islam is defined. And what we're finding in today, in the way that I see things, Islam, because of the absolute ludicrousness, as you've mentioned in your point about dipping the whole fly in, or licking your fingers of all the food because one that you don't know where the blessing is, or the drinking of camel urine, because Muslims are now thinking, well, we've got a choice here. We have to agree that these are true and look totally ridiculous. And you'll find that most people who will disagree with that are those that are living in the Western world. But that's their choice. And then that's where they're becoming almost like Muslim minimalists. And they're taking the most minimal points of the Quran that they can fit into their lives and using that to define their Islam. So what we're finding is, for instance, in the Western world, because access to information has now revealed that Muslims didn't realize what their Muhammad or their Prophet actually taught. So it's a case of, do we actually really believe this? No, we don't. But we're still Muslims. So how can we commit ourselves to Islam without accepting these hadith? Well, it started initially with, some hadith are correct and some hadith are fabricated and some hadith are weak. That's not working anymore. Okay, then, so we'll just abandon the hadith altogether and just be Quranist only. Well, that can't work either, because the Quran makes it quite clear that you have to use Muhammad as your role model. Where's the example of the role model? Well, the example of the role model is in the hadith. And you've had 14 centuries of history where the hadith has actually helped define Islam. So how are you going to eradicate 1400 years of history away from the hadith when 1400 years of, with the hadith have defined Islam as the way that we see it today? The irony is this, and it was brought out last week, that the first three generations are supposed to be the purest of Islam, Muhammad's own words. And you won't find many scholars for dollars that will suggest otherwise, or that hadith is fake. Now, a simple Google research will yield that for every 100 years, you have 5 generations on average. So that would be when the Sirah was written or compiled by Jalalain and such, that would have been 4 centuries later or 20 generations later. 1400 years is 80 generations. So what does people, why are today Muslims moving away from the hadith? When Muhammad said that the first 3 generations are going to be the purest of Islam, that was with the hadith, not without. The removal of the hadith is a 21st century phenomenon. 80 generations later, but let's be generous and say it's only 60 generations later. You're still 57 away from the third generation that Muhammad said was the purest. How do you reconcile that? Islam does not make sense, even with its own estimations, with its own rationalizations, and its own self-righteous justifications.
Okay, thanks for that rant. And David is making a good point here, because he's saying that this is part of the deconversion process, and I agree, because it means that if you go and you reject the hadiths, like exactly what Thunderous is just saying, then it's the first step in an entire process, because what you're doing is you're now saying, well, I'm Quranist only, and this doesn't work because the Quran doesn't give you all the instructions that you can only get in the hadith. So at the end of the day, you're rejecting the Quran as well. So the first step is correcting the hadith, rejecting the hadith, then rejecting the Quran, and then you're out of it.
Oh, exactly. I totally. That was. Yeah. I see that absolutely. That the rejection process has to start somewhere, and it's easier to start with the words of a man than the words of your God. If it's a slow, incremental progression away from Islam.
Okay. But this was just now an insert, because I was still doing the introduction where we said, if you want to comment, question, correct, or simply curious about Islam, you've come to the right place. We don't attack, we don't talk about human beings. We go and we analyze the ideology. And that is very important, that you distinguish between the ideology, in other words, Islam, and distinguish heavily between this and the human being, the Muslim, the person, because we will not go and criticize the individual person unless they're real idiots or they really say stupid things. But in general, we're always going to first go against the ideology. Now, the last thing I just want to say, because I see Rob is now back, don't go to Patreon, don't go to PayPal. Everything we do is free. So there's nothing that we expect from this in return. So we're not going to go e-begging or anything like that. And what we're going to do is just continue doing what we have been doing, and that is looking at the Quran. And what we're doing now at the moment is looking at the Quran literally, in other words, sentence by sentence, word for word. We've managed to get through chapter 2, and I don't know how many months it took us. And we have now arrived in chapter 3 and part 1 of chapter 3. So we're going to see how many sentences we manage today. So another thing, while Muslims have now finished Ramadan and they've celebrated and they've stuffed their stomachs full of stuff, um, we are still talking about rejoicing that they have more followers in 2050 and that their God is giving them more followers. And at the same time, they're talking about flying donkeys and talking ants, and humanity is dying. And this is so weird for me, that Muslims will simply somehow brush aside that Muslims in Sudan, for example, are dying by the millions, and they're not doing anything. They're celebrating their Eid, stuffing their stomachs, and saying, "Wow, Ramadan is finished." Yeah, you've done 1 month of skipping lunch, whereas these people are dying, and you are feeling great about having survived skipping lunch. And you're not doing this permanently, but you're only doing this for a month and you're feeling great. I don't get this. I think this is quite bad, actually. So
Was it?
if we look at research, okay, it shows that human civilization is set to collapse by 2050 if we don't handle the real threat of climate change. So while Muslims are rejoicing and saying, "Yeah, we've managed to skip lunch now for a month," and their brethren, the Muslims in Sudan, are dying, we're going to die anyway, and it doesn't matter whether how many numbers you're going to have and whether you're going to pass Christianity, because we're all going to die, and we're going to die in a very short, period of time because of climate change. And this is something that it says. The analysis concludes that climate change is a current and I'm quoting, a current and existential security risk that threatens the premature extinction of Earth originating intelligent life. End quote. In other words, the world is on a path to the end of human civilization and modern society as we've known it. By 2050, human systems could reach a point of no return in which the prospect of a largely inhabitable Earth leads to the breakdown of nations and the international order. So, dear Muslims, stop asking around and telling us that by 2050 you're going to be the biggest religion. We're going to fucking die. So come up with something else, please, and join us. Come to the 21st century. Stop living in the 7th century. Come and live in the 21st century, because here we have real problems and we need everybody on board to help us solve them, and not talk about camel urine and talking ants and bullshit like that. Don't come to me and say that the blood clot is the most wondrous thing in the whole world. It is not. We're not impressed. What impresses me, if you come up with a solution, and this is a real problem for climate change. That is a solution that I would love to see in the Quran, but we don't get it. And that is something that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle it soon. And if you Muslims are going to carry on thinking only about camel urine and talking ants and flying horses, there's not going to be a planet in a couple of years. So instead of concentrating efforts on climate change, Muslims are still occupied with their petty number counting of members in their club. This is stupid. So this is where I would say, listen, guys, please come to the table and let's tackle reality instead of tackling, talking ants and flying horses and things like that. Okay. And I was
Cool.
going to have another issue. Okay, this is another issue. I'm sorry. And we're starting late, but I need to get through this because I'll forget this by next week. The initial complaint in a case that this is in India and Kerala, okay, where a guy, a madrasa teacher, has now finally been arrested for sexually abusing several minors. As you know, I have Muslims telling me, yeah, the Christian priests, and this is the only thing they do. Come on, imams are no better. And this is just one example where the initial complaint in this was filed by the whatever committee, which is the executive body of the mosque. And the police say Yusuf was a repeat offender, has sexually abused more than a dozen kids. Police added that he was not apprehended before as parents failed to lodge a complaint. Now, this is, in my eyes, false compliance, or I don't know what you want to call this. This thing that you don't want to go against another Muslim. And after being arrested, Yusuf confessed to raping kids since the age of 25. And he was also a victim of sexual assault when he was a child. And he said he took revenge for this on the man who sexually assaulted him by raping the person's daughter. That's not right. That's wrong. And Yusuf was sure he would not get caught, as kids hardly have any knowledge of sexual exploitation and the legal actions that would follow. And the people from this committee hesitated in filing the complaint. They finally decided to take action. Okay, that's it from me for the beginning of the show. Normally I say something positive. I couldn't find anything this week, so I'm sorry, the negative headlines will have to do.
Cool. Alrighty. So I've just come back again. So thank you for that, Stops and Tundras, for sharing some thoughts at the beginning. Shall we get started on Surah 3, verse 1? And it's a beauty. Here we go. There we go. So Surah Al-Imran, the family of Imran, Surah 3, verse 1.
Can you
Alif
show us
Lam
the
Mim.
sentence in 2.1?
Sorry?
Can you show us the
Yep.
the guidance that we are getting from the Quran in sentence 2.1?
Oh, look at that. It's the same thing.
Oops.
What does the Tafsirs have to say about this? Well, it's the same thing pretty much. I did have a quick look at, I mean, look at how much you can write about 3 words, right?
What do you mean 3 words?
3 letters, should I say, or 3
Exactly.
translated words. And there, Al-Jalalain says it best, right? God knows best what he means. And all these other guys have just got a lot of, words there. Presumably, the more words you have, the more people believe that it's got some meaning, right? And it seems like Al-Jalalain is the only one that seems to be honest here. It says God knows what
Rob, just hang on. Mohsen Lala, what does Islam have to do with climate change? All is by Allah's will. I mean, I'm speechless. I'm speechless. I've just shown you that Islam has everything to do with climate change. And now you are here in the chat, and now you are saying, what does Islam have to do with climate change? Are you? No, I'm speechless. Come on, guys, wake up. We have a problem. And the problem is climate change. This earth it's self-destructing in a couple of years. And you are asking me what Islam has to do with this? It's exactly the point. You are talking about talking ants and flying horses instead of addressing climate change. The Quran, Islam, does not tell you anything about climate change because it didn't know about climate change. That's exactly my entire point. Stop addressing fairy tales and start addressing reality. Stop living in the 7th century. Stop worshipping Muhammad and things that, raping slaves is a wonderful idea. Stop these things and come to the 21st century and work here with us. Stop being an Islam, I don't know what, worshipper, and come and address reality. That is the point.
Okay. Stops is on a crusade, climate crusade tonight. So if you're a Muslim and you're going to come on the show tonight, don't bring up climate change.
And he's saying, what does Islam have to do with that? Fuck, it makes me so angry if I hear people like that.
All right, let's try and focus on
quiet now.
Let's try and focus on the Quran now. So ALM, Alif Lam Mim, right? So as we saw with Surah 2, verse 1, same thing. Al-Jalalain seems to be the only one that wants to be honest about this and say God knows best what he means by these letters. These other guys have got lots to say here. This guy just repeats it, Cassini, as if that's an explanation for something. And Ibn Kathir thinks that if he puts a lot of sentences in here and just says nothing of interest here, that will somehow be meaningful. So if you are a Muslim, we would love to hear from you what you think this means, especially given this is supposed to be a clear, concise, and complete book. And Stops, I know you have some theories on this. Thunderous, you probably do as well. Take it away, guys. What could this possibly mean, since no Muslim is able to tell us?
Thunderous, you go first.
Yeah, it's a book made clear. It's a book easy to understand. I say this every week. It was in heaven before it came to earth, before even the earth was created, or the universe for that, in Islamic recensional parlance. And here we are looking at words that nobody understands. You have to ask the question, what the French Connection United Kingdom were they revealed for? What was the point? Where does this make sense? Where is the advantage from Allah? Because it's not the first surah to reveal these letters or words. Well, I know they're letters because I can do the Arabic and the Urdu alphabet. So Alif, Lam, Mim are actually just letters. They're not words. So why are 3 letters there? I haven't a clue. If Muslims themselves don't have a clue, then there's no way that I can add any further knowledge to this. I think for me, it's the case of, was it Jalalain that just said Alif Lam Mim? He doesn't know, only God knows. I think, in colloquial today, if he was standing here and he had to say what do they mean, he'd probably shrug his shoulders and say fuck knows.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever you say. I have a different approach. I look at the history, and in history we have a lot of scribes copying. So the Quran was copied by a scribe from what another scribe wrote. Now, these are not perfect white pages or something like this. These are pieces of skin, pieces of all sorts of material, any material that is plus minus flat and gives you a little bit of a surface that you can write something on with the kind of an ink they had at their disposal. Okay, we need to think over 1,000 years back. If you then go and you give a scribe this and say, you copy everything the way that it is on this piece of paper or on this skin, copy it onto the next skin, everything must be exactly the same. Well, the last scribe put his name on this and said, this is I don't know. Now you need to give me a name that starts with I'll give me Allah. No, I'll give me a first name with L. Liam. Liam Mohsin. Liam Mohsin. He was the scribe, so he put ALM as his initial onto the text and said, this is me. I copied this. And he goes to his foreman, and the foreman says, you copied this. Okay, so now I know ALM was copied by Liam Mohsin, and now I know whom to crucify or to whatever if something is wrong. He checks it, and then 2 years later gives it to the next scribe and says, okay, this one was copied, go and copy this again, and everything needs to be exactly like this. And he does. And he copies the initials of the scribe from 2 years ago over onto the next page, over onto the next document, and this is how it gets there. And then every scribe was told to copy it exactly the same way, and they did.
Sounds like a reasonable explanation to me.
So nothing, magic or anything. No, it's just, human beings.
Yep, that sounds reasonable. But if you're a Muslim and you're listening, please explain to us what you think this is, and most importantly, why. Because anybody can say anything they like, but have you got something reasonable? Is there any way you could show what you claim to believe about this verse? But it seems pretty telling that it could be so.
Well, Mohsin Lala, okay. My teacher used to say the minimization of the surah's name in Tajweed. Okay, great. Now, can you explain how chapter 2 and chapter 3 have the same minimization then? Does that make sense to you? I mean, just plain logics.
But whatever it is, it's very likely going to be subjective, right? Like you said, you've provided something that sounds entirely plausible, right? Just copying initials, etc., right? And that being copied over. And so obviously, if that were the case, right, that would throw the whole Quran's narrative, structure into question more than it is already, right? So I think we can probably agree that at least the three of us, unless there's a Muslim that wants to put forward some sort of coherent response to this, that this doesn't have any meaning, and at least one of the scholars here agrees. The others try and make things up. This one just repeats the same words as if that says anything.
Yeah, but what makes people think 50-odd generations later, after Muhammad's death, that anybody will know what these letters mean? Why would anybody come and try and argue the case that what these letters mean? All they're trying to do, there's a mistake in the Quran. This is one of many of them. Alif Lam Mim, other chapters have different letters. And here we are arguing 50 generations later, 1400 years, about a book made clear, a book easy to understand, with letters that nobody knows. let's face the facts. Nobody knows what they are. Nobody knows why they're there. And there's no explanation, because if there was an explanation, it would have been written down in the first, second, or third generation of Muhammad's time. Then they would have given us the meaning. We would have the meaning now if there was a meaning there to be had.
And presumably they'd have evidence for it, right? Because this Ibn Abbas here seems to suggest that exalted is he, colon. Now, it's not clear if that's what he thinks Alif Lam Mim means, exalted is he on top here. But at least the two below him don't have any idea, and Ibn Kathir goes into a long story here that doesn't really have anything to add.
Well, there's 29 of them. So, and they're all at the beginning. It's always the first sentence in different chapters.
Yeah.
And this is, there's so many different combinations. There's 2 letters, there's 4 letters, different combinations of the same letters. So it cannot make sense as such. So there's a lot of, attempts at explaining it, just like what was done here now in the chat, that this seems to be the name. Well, whatever. I haven't found anything that makes sense so far.
You can make up anything here, right? But what's your reason for believing whatever you say this means? And where's the evidence for that, right?
And the point is, the Quran is supposed, okay, it's the recitation, and this was revealed sentence by sentence over 23 years. Now, if I'm Muhammad and an angel comes to me and says, ALM, I will say to him, what the fuck is that?
There's the point.
And then Gabriel should shoot back and say, listen, God, this dude down there is asking me, what does ALM mean? Can you explain it to him? And nothing happens. Nothing of the sort happens. They just go and they copy it into the Quran. And today, Muslims just have to shrug their shoulders and say, oops, no, we don't know. That doesn't make sense, does it? And they still believe that a God wrote this. I mean, and they still believe that it was brought down bit by bit over 23 years through the one voice of Muhammad. And this is still, I don't know how many generations, I like this number 80 actually. After 80 generations, people have never wondered what this means. And they would just say, well, Allah knows best. And they never think about it. They don't realize that these 29 instances of single letter verses, this is what they're called, actually totally negate the entire concept of a godly Quran, because no God will be caught with his pants down like this. No God worth his salt will produce something like ALM so many times at the beginning of a huge long sector of his book, which is supposed, and this is the laugh in this, supposed to give you guidance. How does ALM give you guidance? What does it do for you? It does absolutely zilch.
But the thing is, though, as well, you're saying, I was working out earlier on about the generations, the number of generations from 3 to the 80 that we have today, and being, right?
Sorry, I'm not laughing about you. I'm laughing about the comment. You shouldn't take this seriously. I mean, we shouldn't take any verse seriously. Sorry.
The thing is, that's talking in human sense. In the if you look at it from the Islamic point of view, before the Quran was revealed, these letters were in heaven for what, billions and trillions of years before.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So why were they? And Allah must have known that he was going to reveal letters that nobody would understand while the Quran was on earth. So what was the point of Allah relaying words, or letters rather, that are in heaven that he knew nobody would understand? What a pointless venture that would have been. Or should I say it has been, if there's any credibility in any of this. Now, Islam,
exactly, and why we're spending so much time on this is because this destroys Islam in my eyes.
Well, I'm going to actually step on that as well by saying, well, Islam has produced a surah like it. Well, here's an ayah, right? And you're saying that no one can produce not even one ayah? I'll tell you what, Mim, Lam, Alif. There you go. It's like it. It's just backwards.
Yeah, I did this also, but I went one step further. I said LOL. LMFAO. I said, well, there you go. Same thing.
Or you could just say Alif Be Pe, which is the first 3 letters of the Urdu alphabet.
Or whatever. It doesn't matter which one. Exactly.
That's the point. So there you go. I've produced a surah like, produced an ayah like it.
I think, guys, I've got it. I think I've got the most rational explanation here.
Here we go.
Okay, ready for it?
Go on.
I think that if there is a God, and it's supposedly this God, then this is all a test. And this is just one of those small little things in the test to get people to think critically. And it's so obvious. And if we, like the three of us here, pass this test, and he does exist, well, hopefully not quite the way he's described in the Quran, but a version of this exists, then we're all going to be in heaven. And anybody that takes this in gullibly, they are going to be punished for not using the critical thinking that they were given by their God that the book supposedly claims they should use. So these are just little tests figured in here. And so that's what he did. So I will look forward to seeing the two of you in paradise, whatever that might look like, with rivers and so forth, right?
And the permanent erection to go and nail all these beautiful virgins. Oh, well, sorry, semi-virgins.
I'll be swimming in the rivers of wine that don't cause hangover.
Exactly.
Okay, but then that would mean every single Muslim who says Allah knows best is now going to go to hell.
Well, you got to fill up hell, right? Otherwise, it's going to be very lonely and very empty.
Is so stupid.
By all means, Muslims, put forward a counter argument. That's the most rational argument. Or maybe between myself and Stops, I'm sure Thunderous can come up with something straight off the bat as well. But if this is a test, then the three of us who don't believe this will be going to heaven. In fact, we don't want you to go to hell, so please use your critical thinking and join us, and stop believing that this is supposed to have come from God in this sense. This is a test to show, hey, even if I did send this book, I put in these little things here just to show you that I wouldn't have sent this in the sense that it's been revealed here. So there you go.
True, David. Excellent. This is exactly what I wanted to say just now. There's Allah giggling hysterically watching us. We are banging our heads. He's just having a laugh. Just a joke.
All right, shall we move on? I mean, what else
Yes,
can one say
please.
here?
Yeah.
We could spend a whole night on this, I think. Right. Surah 2, Ayah 2. Sahih International. Allah, there is no deity except him, the ever-living, the sustainer of existence. Yusuf Ali, Allah, there is no God but he, the living, the self-sustaining, eternal. Well, there we go as well. So if anybody asks where's the word eternal, that's in Surah 2, verse 3. Right? Sustainer of existence, eternal.
Don't take it too seriously.
No. Just want to see this. There's no God but God except the living and the eternal. So just repeat what he said. What else can we say, right? At least he's putting forward some of his claimed attributes, right? So if somebody asks, then there's a sentence where you can say, hey, there he gives some idea of what his attributes are supposed to be. So when I ask Muslims, is he eternal? Then there's one of the verses that can be a reference to that. Of course, the answer is yes. Right. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, or we can just move on, right?
Nah, move on.
Yep. 3:3. He has sent down upon you, O Muhammad, the book of in truth, confirming what was before it. I'm sure we got plenty to say there, and will be revealed in the Torah and the Gospel. And it is he who sent down to thee, step by step, in truth, the book confirming what went before it. And he sent down the law of Moses and the Gospel of Jesus before this, as a guide to mankind. And he sent down the criterion of judgment between right and wrong. Take it away, guys.
How is this a translation? Look at the length of the first and the second part of how Sahih International translated 1.5 lines, and then Yusuf Ali makes this a whole paragraph.
Presumably, I don't remember though where it is. There's something that the Quran will point to, right? Because here it's saying, right, it's a book of truth confirming what came before it. And obviously, I often hear Christians refer to this verse, and it seems pretty clear to me that's what it's saying, right? But obviously, the Muslims are not happy with that, so they claim that the Bible is corrupted in some way. But I'm just wondering if it's in the Quran that it says that, right? Because if it does, then that would seem to be a contradiction with this verse, which seems to be saying quite clearly that it's a book confirming what came before it, right? If it had said it confirms certain things, and here's the things that are true that came before it, and here's the things that are false, well, now we can have that conversation, right?
There is conversation to be had. From Muhammad's recension, he wasn't going to turn around and say that the Bible's been corrupted, because there would have been no evidence in the 6th century to say that the Bible had been corrupted, just as it could be said today. Where's the evidence for the Bible's corruption? There is none. I mean, even if people doubt that the Bible is anything to do with for God, whatever you believe about it, the book is still the same book as what it was before Muhammad was born. So any suggestion the Bible's being corrupted is just the thing is, you see, this verse is here saying that the Bible hasn't been corrupted, but the Muslims are in a situation because every story that you find in the Bible has been bastardized in the Quran, so they've got no choice. They either accept Muhammad as a true prophet and the Bible's being corrupted, or they have to reject Muhammad as a prophet and say that the Bible hasn't been corrupted and accept the narrative of the Bible. So what do? You've got no choice if you're going to take Islam as your default, but to say the Bible's been corrupted and try and, if you can, water down or try and find some sophistry or some argument, to try and rationalization for your position to say that this verse here actually didn't mean this, it meant something completely different to what it's really saying. And that's where you get your rhetorical devices, your reinterpretation, or you got to read it in Arabic. You got to look at it from the classical Arabic point of view. You got to use the word context, because when you don't use those things, you come to any conclusion that anybody would do with the word from a book that's made clear, a book that's easy to understand, and that is the Bible has not been corrupted.
Yeah, it definitely seems they're in a quandary there. So it'd be interesting if you're a Muslim listening, or in fact if you Stops or Thunderous have heard it, what are the verses, because obviously we can't accept tafsir, right, to overrule the Quran. So what are the verses in the Quran that suggest that the Bible is corrupted? I'd be interested to hear any Muslim tell us what that might be.
In chapter 2, there were 1 or 2 that were talking about selling stories for poultry price, which was one of them, which Muslims will infer that that is in some way ambiguously alluding to that the Bible's corruption. But I think, and I don't know where they are, but it talks about not that the Bible's being corrupted, but the religious leaders, whether albeit Christian or Judaism, from the Jewish background, were actually talking perversions of what the narratives were.
Well, the people did it. This is the point.
Yeah, that's the point. It wasn't what was in the books that was poisoned, corrupted. It was what was coming out their mouths was poisoned. Okay,
so somehow Muhammad was able to differentiate.
Let me put it another way. It's what Jesus said to the Pharisees, and I'm not doing any form of apologetics here, but it's what Jesus said to the Pharisees when he was challenging the Pharisees in the 4th century in the book of Matthew. You teach commands of men as doctrines. Jesus didn't say the Bible had been corrupted. He said that the message that the Pharisees were teaching was a corruption. This is in some way exactly what Muhammad was doing.
Yeah, and of course we need the evidence, right? Why should we believe Muhammad and not whatever parts of the Bible he disagrees with, right? What is it that makes him sort of have the upper hand, so to speak? So I guess, and they don't say anything here really either. I was just looking at the first 3 tafsirs, because Ibn Kathir, I think, is just a repeat of what he said in the other one. So it's enveloped by truth. And of course, they've got to say it's true. Obviously, I mean, you can't say there's something false in there, right? I mean, that's pretty self-evident if you're going to push forward this narrative, right?
There it is. They have no choice but to try and, if you like, make this verse true in the sense of what Allah is saying is true. They've got no choice but to do that, but somehow retrospectively try and get some kind of if you like, wedge into the fact that, or not to the fact, but into the minds of Muslims that the Bible's being corrupted. Because when you do look at the 2 narratives, one contradicts the other.
Yeah, so clearly they've got to find a way to do it, right? But just asserting it is not going to be sufficient, right?
Well, that's all they have, though, is the assertion. They have nothing else. Islam has nothing else but assertion.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Stops, you want to add anything?
No.
All right, cool. Let's go on to 334. Sai International. Before as guidance for the people, and he revealed the Quran. Indeed, those who disbelieve in the verses of Allah will have a severe punishment, and Allah is exalted in might and the owner of retribution. Yusuf Ali. Then those who reject faith in the signs of Allah will suffer the severest penalty, and Allah is exalted in might and Lord of retribution. Right? So, on a straightforward reading, to me, if you disbelieve the Quran, there is the severe or severest punishment, right? Simply for disbelieving.
Rob, can you just go back one sentence, because I'm a little bit puzzled that this
Yes,
is
sure.
a continuation of the previous one. He sent to you confirming the book, and he revealed the Torah and gospel, and I'll go to the next one, before as guidance for the people.
That's as one sentence rolls into another.
Yes.
Hmm.
So
That's
that he revealed the old versions, Torah and Bible, as guidance, and he revealed the Quran. So in other words, the arbitrary splitting up of sentences here shows a God couldn't do that. It's a typical human thing where people really don't understand the concept and construct of sentences and simply split this down the middle, in the middle of a sentence. Doesn't make sense.
Yes, I agree. So it would have started with, well, you don't normally start the word with "and," but let's assume that that's a translation thing. He revealed the Quran. So that would normally be a starting point for this next verse, right?
So it would be, he revealed from the previous sentence, he revealed the Bible and the, whatchamacallit, before. So he revealed Bible and Torah before as guidance, and he revealed the Quran.
Although I suppose if we're going to be charitable, that's only Sahih International that says that. So maybe they've just got a
No, Aubrey also, aforetime.
Oh, does he? Oh, yeah. Whoops, sorry.
And can I just add on there something that Rob's mentioned a couple of months ago? We have to bear in mind, this is poetic, this is poetry. So he's got to say it in such a way that has a rhyme and rhythm to it. And, so that has to be taken into account when we're reading it as a translation, that we're not reading it in that rhythmic, poetic way that Muhammad would have revealed it.
Yes.
Okay, but it still, does it make sense to go and start a new sentence numbering when in the middle of a sentence?
Of course it doesn't, but then none of the Quran's going to make sense. So
Okay.
if it was put in an order, in a sentence structure was the way that you'd expect it to be if it was written correctly, it still wouldn't make any sense. I'm trying to be generous here for the Muslims.
Yes, very.
Well, we could go one step further and be even more generous, right? Which is, hey, maybe in fact the original Islamic text, if there is such a thing, made entire sense, and it's just difficult to translate into English. But that, of course, is a problem then in terms of this message being for all people for all time, right? Now, especially if you're going to go, hang on a moment, the translation should make clear sense. So let's assume that the Arabic was great, and in fact, this in Arabic is a good place to start a sentence in some way. Let's try and be charitable and say they have a way of doing that we are unfamiliar with, right? And this is the best that a translation can do. Well, even being super generous like that, that still gives me pause for doubt as a non-Arabic speaker. And presumably, if this message was for all of us, it should be able to be translated accurately and clearly, and in such a way. I would expect Allah to be able to do it in every single language, such that every single native reader of that language would understand and go, "Wow, this is incredible. I couldn't have done better. This is amazing."
But and to add on to your point there, bearing in mind, it's like in Muhammad's hadith, he turns around and says that 123,999 prophets were sent beforehand. Now, let's just assume, being generous to the Muslims, that the other religious holy texts that we have today are also a part of that canon but have been corrupted. We don't find any problem with translation there. We can certainly understand what the Sanskrit texts are saying, what the Hebrew texts are saying, and the Hebrew Aramaic rather, which are very much related to Arabic, and what the Greek texts are saying. In fact, there isn't a piece of literature out there that's been revealed in another language that we don't understand today. So to suggest that Arabic couldn't be translated in a way that we can't understand, therefore we're losing some of the gravitas or message out there, is just a deception on their part, because they recognize how much crap's in there. So to keep it hidden in a dead language that no one can understand.
And of course, God would have known that this is going to be done, right? So it's also His will. So that's why I say I think I've got a strong argument for the fact that God can't be. Well, let me put it this way: if this God does exist, the test is to see this as blatant nonsense, right? In the sense that it can't be from God. This was made up by, ignorant desert-dwelling guys that didn't really know anything over many centuries, etc. Right? And then to put it forth like this today, and I think if that's the test, I feel very positive that I'm the one going to heaven, and the believers aren't. I do feel for them, by the way, if that were the case, and I don't want them to. So please do join us, guys. Use your critical thinking here and join us. Anything else you guys want to add on this one?
No.
Obviously, for me, 3.4 is a problematic verse, right? And this seems very straightforward, that all you have to do is reject faith in the book, or not believe what it says, in the sense that it's supposed to be entirely from this all-knowing God, and for that, the severest punishment, right? And then you can take this verse and various others, and you can see why apostates and others, are seen just, let's say, extremely charitably, less favorably, right? Now, presumably Muslims could argue, well, hey, this is not our punishment, right? This is God's punishment. Well, if that's the case, then you shouldn't have any problem with apostates or anything else, right? If he's the one that's dealing this out. But you could see how perhaps some Muslims would go, hey, well, if it's going to have the severest punishment, then maybe I'm sort of acting in a way to keep the society together. And if Allah was going to do it, surely, he'd be okay with me doing it, because otherwise my entire community is going to get corrupted. Who knows? I'm sure they could argue a way around that, but to me it's highly problematic anyway. So I'll keep that one as a reminder as well. When they say, why is it that you don't believe the Quran, or why do you think it's not a moral book, or whatever the case is, then this will certainly be a verse I shall remind them of.
Yeah, but you have 105 of these.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I'm sure they say it in similar ways, right?
Yes.
Well, so there we go. 105 of them. Here's just one of them. We'll obviously read a lot more, and we have read some in the other verse as well. They might be translated slightly differently, but I think the message is still clear, right? Rejection of faith, or rejection of the Quran, or whatever the case is, or disbelief in Allah from the Quran, is cause for severe, or the severest punishment or penalty, or whatever term you wish to use. So there you go. And again, if this was an all good God and was so persuasive, no punishment would be required, right? It would be so good that it would be, almost self-evident, right? Like our existence, or whatever the case is, let's say. But clearly it's not. So you've got to add a little bit of punishment in here to encourage those of us who might use our critical thinking, right? But as I say, if it's an Allah that's testing everybody else who willfully goes along with us, then I think we're in the pound seats, guys. Should we go first class? I don't want to go coach. What do they call it? Coach? Economy? Let's go first class.
I'd rather take the route or course that Muhammad took and get on a winged horse to heaven. So,
well, I think we can update that today. Hey, we can teleport, right? If they can do it in Star Trek, I'm sure Allah can do even better than that. But I suppose if you want to get like a nice view and take a ride, and presumably, of course, when you get into the stratosphere, somehow you'll be able to breathe air, or there'll be some sort of air bubble around you, or something like that, right? But I'm sure Allah knows best, so I'm sure we'll leave that to him. Let's not worry ourselves with scientific discoveries and issues. All right, let's move on to number 5. These are certainly short ones anyway. 3.5, Sahih International. Indeed, from Allah nothing is hidden in the earth nor in the heaven. Yusuf Ali, from Allah, verily nothing is hidden on earth or in the heavens. Well, obviously, if he's all-knowing and all-powerful, you would expect that, right? So it's kind of a trivial statement in that sense, right?
It's the kind of statements you find in any religion, because that has to be the default of a creator. That nothing is hidden to him.
Yeah, well, presumably, if he's has the omni properties, if he's just a powerful creator, right, then you could imagine something that he didn't know would happen, right? But as soon as you make it a more powerful version of that, then no, yeah, then it becomes a trivial statement. It's obviously something that's, yeah, it's trivially true, right? It's like saying, somebody argues with you at any time. Try this, guys. If you ever have an argument next time, somebody says something, say, hang on a moment, but all humans breathe air. And listen to hear what response you get, right? It's like a trivially true statement that doesn't add anything to the conversation, right? If you understand what the words mean or whatever the discussion is, right? Adding stuff like that doesn't tell us anything we didn't already know. But having said that, maybe it did for the people floating about in the desert. Right? Maybe all the other sentences prior to this, they didn't get the message, and so he had to put forth a trivially true statement. No existent thing is hidden. Yeah, on account of his knowledge and universals and particulars. Yeah, there we go. Pretty straightforward, really. Okay, moving on. Number 6. It is he who forms you in the wombs, however he wills. There is no deity except him, the exalted might, the wise. Yusuf Ali, he it is who shapes you in the wombs as he pleases. There is no God but he, the exalted in might, the wise. Now, this wombs, is he talking about literally? Presumably, he's talking literally about the, in your mother's womb. So, is he shaping, or is it the or is it the natural occurrence of, the mixtures of male and female seminal fluids?
Chromosomes, yeah. Well, it's the DNA that does it. It's just that in those days they thought he's influencing it. I mean, we're all created from dust or water or blood clot, or you have 13 different materials we are made from, and then you are being shaped and formed following the ancient Greek medicine, which we know today is wrong.
I just want to see it. There's no fashion or creator save him who's vengeful against whoever does not believe in him. Of course, you've got to be vengeful, right? That's one way you keep people in line, right? In creating what is in the wombs. So again, if this is to be taken as face value, right, then presumably there's a couple of things with this, really. If this is the case, right, that he is in fact forming you in the wombs, and that's a literal thing, then it's actually something called occasionalism, right? I actually looked this up, and there's some Muslims that believe this.
Rob, somebody wants to join. The way that it works is just go to Facebook, and then
I can't see them, right?
Send a message to Rob Speaker's Corner.
I can't. Stops. I can't.
Shit.
Yeah.
Sorry, you have to send a message to me. And now I need to check. What did you say last time? You tried sending it to Jinn&Tonic show, and it came, right, and arrived. It somehow I got it. So go to Facebook, go to Jinn&Tonic show.
Bring the easier version of this up. Carry on.
And then go and just tell me you'd like to join. I'm going to check you out and then send you the link. Okay.
Okay. So,
Rob, did you manage to set up the delay?
let me do that now quickly. 1 second. Sorry, guys. I'm going to read this to you in a second, because this is something that is potentially influences. Yes, I've set it up now. So
Good.
That verse talks about him forming it in the womb. And occasionalism is the philosophical theory about causation, which says that created substances cannot have efficient causes of events. In other words, occasionalism denies cause and effect. Instead, all events are taken to be caused directly by God, right? So God is in fact causing every single thing. The movement of my hands, the opening of each word out of my mouth, your mouth, every single thought we have, right? So this denies causation entirely. So this is kind of is the counter, I suppose, or the opposite side of determinism, which is everything is cause and effect, all the way back to the Big Bang and beyond, right? And if this is the case, then obviously going back to this verse here, you could be an occasionalist and claim that this is the case, but then you'd have to claim that God is in fact influencing every single particle, as this mentions here. I think they say every single particle, certainly every single event. You can call it that. But then in what sense have you got free will, right? If he's influencing every single event, then, that would deny free will. So I don't know how many people would adhere to occasionalism. But if you take this literally, then you'd have to be an occasionalist and say that he's physically doing this, unless he's creating miracles every time somebody's born, right? Or every formation in the womb, right? But we understand the natural process for how this works, right? So on that alone, I would certainly question this. And so I would assume that as a Muslim, you're going to have to come up with something else and not say that he's literally creating you or every human in the womb. But here, the tafsirs are saying that, right? He forms you in the wombs as he wills. talk of this as two sides, the affirmation of the form of a creator and the explanation of his power over creatures. Okay, that's a trivial statement. I just want to see if there's something a little shorter here that somebody. It's he who forms you in the womb as he wills, males or females, white, black, or otherwise. There is no God except him. Okay, again, just repeating what's been said before. So, yeah, again, just another verse that I have a problem with as to how you're going to explain this if you're a Muslim. You guys got anything you want to add to that?
No.
No.
Cool. Okay. 3:7. Sai International. It is he who sent down to you, O Muhammad, the book. In it are verses that are precise. Aha. They are the foundation of the book, and others unspecific. Okay. As for those in whose hearts is deviation from the truth, they will follow that of it which is unspecific, seeking discord and seeking an interpretation suitable to them. And no one knows its true interpretation except Allah. But those firm in knowledge say, we believe in it. All of it is from our Lord, and no one will be reminded except those of understanding. Who? Yusuf Ali. He it is who sent down the book, down to thee the book. In it are verses basic or fundamental of established meaning. They are the foundation of the book. Others are allegorical, but those in whose hearts is perversity follow the part thereof that is allegorical, seeking discord and searching for its hidden meanings. But no one knows its hidden meanings except Allah. And those who are firmly grounded in knowledge say, we believe in the book, the whole of it is from our Lord, and none will grasp the message except men of understanding. Whoa. You guys go first.
No, I'm not going to go first. This is so standard, so yeah.
Okay. You want to add something, Thunderous? Otherwise, I'll go through bits by bits here. My word. This is quite a remarkable thing to say. In it are verses precise, or this says fundamental, established in meaning, right? They are the foundation, others are unspecific, right? Or others are allegorical, right? So the first question would be here, apart from anything else, how do you establish which are precise and which are unspecific, allegorical? And
who decides and how are they marked?
Exactly. And of course, it says down here, or thinks it can answer it by saying those firm in knowledge say they believe in it. Well, how do you establish that you are firm in knowledge? What is it that gives you the understanding that other people don't have or can't have? And if you are because no one knows its true interpretation, right? Certainly of the unspecific verses. So if you don't know, how do you establish which is basic, which is fundamental or precise, if you want to use Sahih International, and which isn't? Surely you would expect the methodology to come in. Well, firstly, let's go back a step. I would not expect anything unspecific. If this book is for me to understand in its entirety, and not just we believe in the book, the whole of it is from our Lord, when built in there is stuff that it itself says is unspecific or allegorical, then you're asking to believe on faith alone. Yet elsewhere, the claim is, I read it differently, but the claim is that you're supposed to ponder on this. Well, we are pondering it right now, right? Well, I am at least, and I'm sure my co-panelists are as well. We're pondering this, and this doesn't make sense, right? Especially if you're sending it down from God, who wants to send a clear message, but at the same time, he wants to have some things that are unspecific, and its true interpretation, which shouldn't be needed, is only known by Allah. So why on earth would you ever put them in? If he's the only one that would understand it, why would he put it in for humans that will never get to understand it?
It's a declaration of bankruptcy.
Yes, it's a backdoor escape, right? So because it's
Just bring Thunderous back in.
Oh, sorry, he's in, is he? Sorry, go. Hang on a sec. 1 sec. Let me just show you in the broadcast. There you go. Yep.
Yeah, when we were going, when it was being read and I was reading through it, it's almost like covering your angles and points. It's having all, how can I put it? It's having all your points covered if you're challenged. How is anything to be? How can you tell the difference between literal and allegorical? This is a book really clear, a book easy to understand, a book in heaven before time even existed. And how are you supposed to know? So basically, then, when you dissect the Quran, then how much of it is actually of any benefit when you strip it down to the skeletal points of anything that's supposed to establish some kind of benefit for mankind? If you don't know what is and what isn't allegorical, you may as well just take out what the stories and accounts are if you don't know whether it's allegorical or not.
Exactly. You can do whatever you want with the entire book.
Which is what I meant by all your points are covered then, aren't you? Because this goes back to what I've said before about the Quran. It depends where you're living as to how you apply it. When you're living in the Western world, you show those verses that are, it's a book. What was it that we were reading a few weeks ago? There's no compulsion in religion. You show that to the Western audience. But when you're in the Middle East, where you're living in an Islamic and controlled country, we do not tolerate mischief. Behead those who criticize the prophet. And this is one of those kind of like, well, it's allegorical when you're in the Western land, but it's literal when you're in a Muslim controlled land.
Yeah, it's entirely subjective as to what. And the response I hear from Muslims is, well, hey, the 5 pillars are clear, supposedly, right? This is the claim anyway. The 5 pillars are clear. The other stuff, while it's in the Quran, it's not necessarily required to know that. Well, then why have it in there? If it's not required from any Muslim or most Muslims, why would you have it in there? And what does it benefit the so-called people of those firm in knowledge, or what's the other term, those firmly grounded in knowledge? What does it benefit them? What are they going to get from something which it says it's no one knows the true, quote, interpretation except Allah, right? So why not just have the basics in there and follow that, and not have any of this other stuff? Because these people who are firm in knowledge, supposedly, because presumably they could only be firm in knowledge in the specific things anyway, right? The precise things, which other people could be as well. So everything that's unspecific or allegorical, they wouldn't know its meaning anyway. So why on earth would you have it in there? What does it benefit? Because nobody's going to understand it. And moreover, you're more likely to have people who might seek a quote-unquote interpretation suitable to them, in inverted commas, right? Because nobody knows, right? So searching for hidden meanings, but nobody knows its hidden meanings except Allah. Why would you have them in there? Because by definition, that could sow discord. So is the purpose to sow discord in some way?
But the thing is, Allah himself says this is a book made clear, a book easy to understand, and then he's contradicting himself by saying there are hidden meanings in it that only he knows. So it's not a book made clear; it's not easy to understand. So Allah contradicts himself.
Well, of course, they will come back and say, no, he doesn't, because this verse makes clear that there are certain things that are precise and certain are other ones. So they would probably come back to you and say, hey, book made clear, etc., only refers to the precise or fundamental verses. But again, if it hadn't been made clear.
That's not what the verse says. The verse says this is a book. When somebody uses the term, this is a book, they mean in its entirety, from Genesis to Revelation, from the Alpha to the Omega, from end to end, cover to cover, whatever euphemism you want to use. This is what those verses mean. And we've just come across a verse that says that there are some stories that are allegorical with hidden meaning. That means that if you can't tell the difference between an allegorical and literal, that's one thing that's not clear. That's something else that's not easy to understand. And then it says it has a meaning. And if you're trying to interpret their meaning, well, you can't, because only Allah knows what the meaning is. So that's 2 things that Allah contradicts himself with in one verse from another verse.
Yeah, and my reading would be the same as yours. If it said a book made clear, I expect that to mean the entirety of the book. And if it didn't mean that, it would say certain parts of the book, or mostly a book made clear, or some other language that would make this clear, right?
But in any case, it doesn't provide any kind of guidance. And I don't understand why Muslims are so incredibly proud of this sentence.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you be? I mean, we're picking apart this sentence here, and it's probably one of the worst sentences I've seen, in the sense of it saying things here that are quote unquote highly questionable at the very least, right?
But remember our village idiot. This is the first thing he always comes up with. Yeah, but there are some sentences which are, what the fuck? How does it help you? It doesn't help you in any way. It makes it worse.
Yeah, and if you didn't have these verses that were unspecific, then those with hearts of deviation couldn't seek discord, because they would have to accept, if they were intellectually honest, all the verses that are precise, right? So you wouldn't have discord. So if these verses are in here, and this book was, floating about in heaven for eternity, then it seems like the plan was to have these verses in here, so because he knew that certain people like you and I would question these things. And, well, I'm not seeking discord per se, but if that's an interpretation that he or others want to have, then that's fine. But it would be impossible for me to do that if all the verses were precise. So throwing in some unspecific verses, in a sense, it's like, what's the term in America? When you, it's entrapment, right? It's entrapment. Because I'm specifically going to use the mind that Allah gave me to the best of my ability, which I acknowledge is I'm not the smartest guy around, but I'm going to use it to the best of my ability. So it is. I am going to try and work it out, right? And so if he didn't have that, I wouldn't need to. I go, okay, self-evident, and we've had a few verses that are seemingly self-evident, right? So
we've got Ismail in here.
Mm-hmm. What in? Oh.
I don't know if you guys remember.
Yes,
Good
sir.
evening, Ismail. Hi there. Sorry, you're now broadcasting live. You were muted there for a moment, so you're now with us and broadcasting. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, guys.
You were very respectful the last time we spoke to you. It's nice to see you, speak to you again.
Yeah, no, I did enjoy that. I had to go quickly last time, but I think this time we have a bit more time and we can discuss Surah Al Imran. I think you just started that tonight.
Yes.
So we can get discussing on that. Which verse are you guys on?
We're on 3:7 at the moment. 3:7. Maybe you can bring that up. It is on screen if you can't see it. If you've got your own copy, maybe you could read your version, or maybe you can give us your thoughts. I have a number of problems with this verse. So I'd like to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if you guys mind, just before that, I just want to know, like, maybe a half a minute on each of you guys, if you're an atheist or what's exactly your background. I'm not sure. I myself am studying I'm studying the Islamic sciences. I'm still a student, so I don't know that much, but I can understand the Arabic language, and I thought it'd be nice if I offer my own perspective on these things. And I just like to know you guys' names and what's your background.
Before you do that, do you want to switch off your camera, because it is pointing to the floor, and if you don't want to be identified or anything to be identifiable, maybe just disable your camera so it'll come up with just your. If you're okay with it, that's entirely fine. But I just want to let you know that we can see the floor through your camera. There we go.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. Right.
Well,
okay,
I think,
good.
Ismail, just to say that we're all non-Muslims. I mean, we can talk about other things, but I think, there's a bit of a diversion. I mean, we're happy to chat about that, especially if you come onto Discord after the show. I don't want to get us too caught up in, other than we are obviously critics of Islam and we're all non-Muslims. If you need some more information, then you're more than welcome to that. I'll leave it to my colleagues to say whatever they'd like to say to you.
Well, yeah, I'm just an ex-Muslim that believes the Bible. That's my minimal comment.
Myself and Stops are not ex-Muslims, but we don't believe in a God. But I think between Thunderous, myself, and Stops, we are equally critical of Islam. And that's not to say that we're critical of all Muslims. So I want to make that distinction clear as well. We're critical of the text and certain Muslims that follow certain parts of the text very straightforwardly. I think that's problematic.
Okay.
I've
understood that it's not something against Muslims in general or any specific person. It's a critique on the religion itself. And that's why I've decided to come here, of course, because I expected it and I've seen it to be objective. So just to get it straight, one of you guys is a Christian.
Yes, I follow the Bible.
Okay. Yeah, so I see we're on verse 3:7, but just a small background to this chapter. It'd be there in Ibn Kathir, I'm sure, in the beginning, that it was revealed in response to Christians, ironically or not, in the 9th year after the migration. And that's why some of the verses, I caught a bit of the earlier part, while they might seem meaningless, have some relation to the Christians and some beliefs that the Qur'an states that the Christians have. That would be in the beginning. Now, for verse 3:7 I think one of the most talked about verses in the commentary is, if you look at Ibn Kathir, there's probably a lot there, because what's classified as muhkam or clear and what's classified as ambiguous, that's a big discussion. But what questions do you guys have about it?
Well, I think to start off with, this explanation, because I think Thunderous brought this up, right? And I'm sure, hopefully, you would agree that there is other verses that says this is a book made clear, right? And to our understanding and reading of that, if elsewhere in the Quran it says a book made clear, I take it to mean that the entire book is clear. Now we come across a verse that says there are certain verses that are precise and others that are unspecific or allegorical, depending on the translation. You might be able to see it on screen there. So I think maybe if you can address that first, because there seems to be a contradiction between other verses and this specific one.
In terms of, I'm not sure exactly which verse you're talking about, though I know there are plenty of verses which say this is a book which has been made clear, although there are two different verses when it comes to that. One uses the same exact word found here for made clear, and there it's used in a context of the verses have been made perfect. Although in other places where it says the verses have been made clear, I think it would be better. I don't know if it's possible if you could show me that verse. I know it does exist. I'm not accusing you of making it up or anything, but to address it exactly, it'll be easier if I could see which one.
Thunderous, can you have a look while we're doing this? Because I've got the screen up. I don't want to unshare my screen here. So if you could.
Well, hang on, but now we're going on a totally different track. Why is this important?
No, because there's, as I said earlier, I need to know exactly which verse you're referring to, because some verses, I know there are verses which say that maybe some translations were translated, but if we could see all, some were translated as using the exact same word, but more in the meaning of each verse has been made perfect. And if you look at Jalalain on this same verse, if you could just bring up Jalalain there, I think they have an explanation for that, because it's a common, it actually is a common question.
So
Okay.
yes,
You said something at the beginning which I found quite interesting. You said this is sentence number 3 and it was revealed at some point in time.
Yeah, the first 80, I'm not sure, 80 something verses, if I'm not mistaken, were revealed in the 9th year after the migration in response to a delegation coming from a Christian region somewhere in Arabia. It's called Najd, but I can't say I know where that is exactly.
Okay, why would you say this? This statement, where does it come from?
No, I've seen it in, I think almost every tafsir would have it. I've seen it in multiple tafsirs. Let me just see if Ibn Kathir has it. I'll just check right now for you. But no, this is, yeah, I'm, okay, let's see.
But I don't quite understand. You are saying that there is somebody else who makes a claim and then you are unable to verify this, but then you still you repeat the claim.
No, I'm not unable. I'm looking at it in Ibn Kathir right now. I got the Arabic. It says that there in the beginning. Now, if you mean verify in terms of with a chain of narration, then I'd have to check further for that. But generally, when I'm studying it, if a reliable tafsir has it, I would take that as a background. I wouldn't take it as something being unchangeable. But most tafsirs seem to have it. Like Ibn Kathir, I'm looking at it right now.
All right, the point that I'm trying to make
Yeah.
is we have a sentence here in the Quran which says that there are sentences, some are precise and some are not. So the Quran itself is saying, I can take the entire Quran as being allegorical and as worth nothing but my own interpretation. And yet you are saying, no, I'm giving it a specific date when something was revealed. So what you are saying is not only are you buying into this concept of revelation of an angel whizzing up and down and or left, right, or wherever they go or whatever. Not only are you saying that all of this is true, all of these are facts, you even give it a date where nobody is able to do so. And this is mind-boggling for me that somebody would go and make something up and then you say, yep, that's it. But you can't check it. You can't. And you're saying it's a chain of narration. Well, I can write a chain of narration. I can write some names and then Bob's your uncle. Why would you go and say something like this? This is mind-boggling for me that somebody will say, yep, it was revealed on Friday the 15th, 3:15, and is it? I don't understand that.
Okay, so this is like I never, it's like a new question to me. In terms of the chain of narration, yes, while it is possible for you to write a chain of narration, this is, I mean, a major part of the Islamic sciences relies on the chain of narration. The hadith all come with a chain of narration. And so the chain of narration, I know you could, if you did, let's possibly say, wrote a whole chain of narration, we'd write it off anyway because we wouldn't accept a narration from someone who's not a Muslim. And they have to pass certain criteria. Now, basically, when I'm saying, I'm not making the statement up or anything.
No, we understand all that. We know all that.
Yeah, okay.
We've looked at these and we found they're fake. Okay, so what the hell? So I'm saying, I'm pointing out the discrepancy here, where the Quran says everything could be fake, and then you say, yeah, but this was revealed on this and the date, when we don't even know whether the Quran is correct, and yet you are coming with a degree of certainty which is astonishing for me, telling me that this is the date on which the sentence that tells me that it could all be a fake was revealed. This for me is mind-boggling.
I don't think the sentence anywhere says it could all be a fake. I'm not sure where that comes from. But secondly,
it's here.
What did it say?
7.
What does it say?
That you don't know what is true and which is not.
No, it says if you okay, I don't know what which tafsir is this, above 3.7. I can't see the top.
The top one will probably be Al Jalalain or something like this. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm back there. I just had to step away from him. Yeah, this is Al Jalalain.
Yeah, so I mean, the majority understanding, the general understanding is that clear. Okay, they got the word there. Muhkam is those obvious verses where it's like the meaning is absolutely clear and there's no doubt in it, and the others are like the beginning of the surah, the first ayah, which no one knows the meaning to that. It's not like, imagine if the Quran said that, oh, anything could be fake, and I mean, then who would even trust it to begin with? I mean, come on.
Exactly. That is the problem that I have, because it says here it's muham, and some say it's mubin or whatever, but on the other hand, it says it's allegorical, so it can be totally fake.
Sorry, I've missed your discussion, so I apologize if you've already asked this, or it's already been asked and you've been answered. Just tell me, and I'll listen back. But how do you establish which are what's the term here that Jalalain uses, which are clear and have no perfections, and which are allegorical? How do you establish that? Has that been asked of you already? Or?
Yeah, that has been. That's like, it's a major topic. But I just first say that. Obviously, there's a lot of difference of opinion, and then someone might ask, well, if there's so much of difference of opinion, then how do we even know what's right? But the difference of opinion is more to do with the specificity of the words muhkam and mutashabih. So what I'm saying is, from the verse, just reading the translation only, you get the idea that whatever is clear and whatever has no possibility of other meanings, you would take that as an interpretation. I mean, you would take that to make your rulings first, and those which have possible meanings and you interpret it in one way, which there are some verses like that which can be interpreted in many ways, then you don't put that above the other verses. That's just a face value meaning. And then when it comes to like exactly what they are, then, well, here we'll see that muhkam is those, mutashabi will be the beginning of it's as it says there, the beginning of some surahs. Mutashabi, we really don't know what it means, and the rest is all muhkam. There's different like opinions on this.
Yeah, okay, so let's say
I was asking Rob,
carry on.
Where does this discrepancy come in? Where on the one hand it says that there are clear sentences, on the other one it says they're not. So on the one hand it says if we take 99% of the sentences in the Quran as being unclear, not clear, in being imperfect, and that they are subject to interpretation, to different interpretations, which could be fake. So 99% of the Quran could be fake. And on the other hand, what Ismail is doing is he's saying the sentence that says that the entire Quran could be fake and is not precise was precisely revealed on January the 18th, 1604 on date X. So there's a huge discrepancy here. There's a disconnect for me, where on the one hand, he is very precise. And then on the other hand, he says, la-di-da-di-da, it could all be fake.
Who says it could all be fake? Sorry.
Can I just, one more time. I just want to just make it clear that when it says mutashabihat or okay, whatever I don't know, yeah, they got it there in Arabic. It's got nothing to do with being fake. It's got to do with those verses which have possible multiple interpretations due to the language. It's got nothing to do with whether it's no, it's got nothing to do with wrong or right. It's got to do with where you can.
Could the interpretation be wrong?
Meaning, yeah, you could look at it and possibly get a specific interpret. And those verses have been, as you see in Jalal.
That's what I'm saying. It could all be fake. Everything could be totally wrong. I could take 99% of all the sentences in the Quran and I could interpret them totally wrong. I could just make that up. I can just make that statement.
Yeah, I mean, anyone could go to any book and interpret anything wrong. I know what you're saying, that this is a specific verse saying that. But what it's trying to caution against is, and they give specific examples, and I'll just give you one example where in one specific verse, I think it's in the 5th chapter, it says that do not say, addressing the Christians, saying that Jesus is the word of God and the soul, and these verses are classified to be as the Christians could interpret it as many ways. And then just below that, it says clearly, do not say that God is three. And what it's trying to say is take the clear verse instead of those which you could possibly interpret in some other way. It's not saying that, I mean, there's many sentences in many books can be interpreted in many different ways. It's just cautioning against using those sentences against those which are clear. It's got nothing to do with being fake.
No, that's exactly my point. And now, how do you get to the date?
No, the date, I'm gonna assume in this case, generally, I would admit that I'm not as questioning as you guys, but in Ibn Kathir, I'm sure he would have had a chain of narration. It's there in the tafsirs. And again, I'm not saying it as something like definite, but this is what they've given. And it's not a date, it's just a year. It's because this happened in this year and some companion or person coming after the companion would have said that this was revealed in this date based on our experience. Again, obviously, if you want to reject that, I guess you can, but it gives us some knowledge where there was no knowledge, so we'll take it in that case.
Why? Why would you take this? Okay, this is exactly my point. Why are you giving any kind of certainty to something that is totally fabricated, and then you say a sentence in the Quran which says that could all be fabricated? You say, no, this is impossible. So for me, there's this disconnect here where on the one hand, you're saying, well, we have the date. Now you're backpedaling a bit, saying, okay, well, actually, the date is not actually a date. It's more wishful thinking. But don't you see that there is a difference here, where the sentence number 7 is a complete and utter declaration of bankruptcy for anything that is in the Quran? Because you don't know what you can trust, what you can't. You don't know which sentence is clear and which one is not. You don't know which one has been interpreted the right way and which one has been interpreted the wrong way. You don't know anything.
Okay. Again, I never said that.
And this is not against you, okay? I'm not attacking you anyway. I'm just saying the concept here of what I see in the tafsirs and the concept of what I see in the Quran, and I see the sentences in the Quran.
Yeah, no, I'm not taking it as a personal attack.
Okay, good. Yeah.
No, don't you don't have to worry about that.
I think Stops' question could be answered, Ishmael, if there was a way within the Quran to undertake an investigation, or if it better still, if it revealed which verses were specific, precise, or perfect, and which were not. If that were the case, and it was highlighted, or it was known, that would still bring into question why there should be unspecific verses, which we'll come to shortly. But if that was clear in the Quran, then of course Stops, I, you, and everybody else would go, okay, now it's clear which ones are the precise ones and which ones are not. And we could still ask why they're not precise, but we would have an understanding.
Right, okay, understood. But just to make a difference between, like, even if the Quran did say that, like, let's just assume that it said that, okay, you're not going to know, and like some things could just be wrong and whatever, which I guess if you want to interpret it that way, you might be seeing it like that. But let's say it did say that, the chain of, if there was a solid chain of narration leading up to a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that these verses came down, then it would be totally independent of whether the verse said this or it didn't say this. I don't know if you know what I'm saying. Like that's totally independent. Like we trust the chain of narration. If it was sound and it was solid, and the companion said it came down in the 9th year, then whether the verses said this or they said that the whole Quran is perfect, it wouldn't really affect that chain of narration in any way. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that not make sense?
It seems to me you're saying that, hey, if you've got what you consider to be a solid chain of narration, then it's not as important. It's important. Well, it's important in the sense that the verse, you think that the verse was narrated in a specific time because there's a solid translation, but that doesn't tell us which verses are precise and which aren't, right?
Yes, yes. No, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that we still got to get to, okay, which is mutashabih, which is muhkam. But the part about me giving that year, if I'm just using a solid chain of narration, it's not really connected to that at all. It's got to do with its own thing. I don't know if you know what I'm saying. Like, that's a separate thing. Although it might seem farcical on the face of it, because, like, I mean, here we're talking about this, and I'm being precise on one hand, and here we're talking about things not being clear. It might seem a bit contradictory, but in reality, as like I'm showing, it's not really related. Although, like, because it happens to coincide here, it might seem like that, but in reality, it's not really related.
Well, I think where it stops is, and I'm listening in to try and see if I understand stops, and he can say no, it's not quite what I'm saying. But if I understand it, here you're giving some specific information about the chain of narration, and yet we are looking at the Quran and we are battling to understand the word of God, right? So you have something that is humanly sent down, right? As in, because again, historical claims could be inaccurate. Have we got evidence for these claims? Are they strong historical claims that are backed up by strong evidence, right? So, and that's a human historical inquiry, right, around the chain of narration. And if you could present that, and that was accepted by the vast majority of historical scholars, then we could go, okay, maybe there's good reason to believe that it came down at that period of time. But then you have this book that comes from the Almighty, which has supposedly precise verses and imprecise or allegorical verses, and no way to distinguish between them. To me, and maybe to my colleagues here, we would expect the exact opposite. We would expect the precision in the Quran and the more vagueness in the human historical record. But it seems, if I understand stops, that to you, the historical record is seemingly, in a sense, more specific than the verses in the Quran, or even a methodology to undertake an investigation of these verses in the Quran.
Yeah, no, I understood exactly what you're saying, but as I showed, like, it just happens to, like, be glaring in this instance because the verse we're talking about is that controversial verse speaking about these things, where in reality there's, like, many other verses in many other chapters where they tell you it was revealed in this year or after this event or like this year, and whether if the chain of narration is solid, we rely on it. If it's not, we're not. And in there, the verses itself we're referring to would be, like, clear in themselves, so there would be no, like, this whole issue wouldn't have come about. But here, because of the coinciding of this verse and me saying something specific, I guess it does seem like that. But I mean, you'd have to admit that they really have nothing to do with each other. But let's, like, more talk about the verse now, because that's not, like...
Okay, but we will get to another question, which is why would they be? But what interests me is, what would your solution be? What are you taught in your whatever institution you're learning this in? How to address this? How do you approach a sentence in the Quran? Do you rather go and say each one is clear, or do you first take a look? Is there a possibility of multiple interpretations, and therefore we need to address this in a different way? How do you categorize these kind of sentences for yourselves?
Okay, that's a fair question. Like, generally for us, if we're going through it, we're generally using all the tafsir. So we're not really, if the tafsir tells us it's part of the mutashabihat, then we'd view it as such. And just the major scholarly opinion generally is that these mutashabih verses are the first, like, as in the surah, the first verse has those letters, huruf al-muqatta'at, which are, there's no meaning to it. So those are put in there. And other verses where the majority of scholars say that the other verses that go there are those which describe God using like human attributes, and these are part of the mutashabih, because that's generally what they put there. The rest of the verses are generally regarded as being clear, and, like, that's how I'm saying, that's how we view it when we're dealing with it.
Can I ask a question? Ismail, the commentators came 400 years later, yeah? So what did they believe for the first 400 years with reference to this ayah?
No, it's nice to explain this also, that the first complete books of commentary, the first would be Tafsir al-Tabari. It's not translated, but that would be in the 310 years after the migration.
Okay,
I'd say.
So what did they believe for the first 300 years?
Yeah, no, I wasn't correcting you on that. I'm just getting to it, to that. And those tafsirs in the beginning years were not like Jalalain, where he just tells you, he just fills in the blanks. Those tafsirs were just chains of narration leading up to the companions. So the companions, the Prophet gave tafsir of many verses. Like I saw last week, you all did the verse about God will take you to account for whatever you whether you reveal it or you hide it. God will take you to account for it. So in Bukhari and in the Hadith collections, this the whole background of this verse is explained. So it was explained by the Prophet at times, not all verses, just some, and then the companions would ask and they would explain, and then the thing. So we have chains of narrations going up to them, and the first few commentaries, they just collect those chains of narrations. That's it. They don't really give too much of consideration to whether they're authentic or not. They just collect chains of narrations. And then you have Jalalain coming in, say 900 years after, and it is 900 years after. He just looks at the view that he thinks is best, and he puts it in between the brackets there. And Ibn Kathir as well, he takes chains of narrations and he just puts it in there. So the companions were giving commentary from that time. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself was giving commentary from that time whenever it was needed.
And what evidence do you have for that?
Well, I can show you the chains of narrations to the companions. It's in Arabic, but I can put it on my phone here. And Ibn Kathir itself has chains of narrations going up to the Prophet or going up to the companions. It's there in Ibn Kathir. It's mainly made up of just chains of narrations going up to them. He very rarely gives his opinion in his tafsir. It's long, I know, but it's just mainly narrations. You won't see his opinion too much.
Not too much, but his opinion is in there.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Sometimes if he has to clear something up, he will put it in there. But mainly it's made up of chains of narrations and those narrations themselves.
Do you not think, when you yourself have admitted earlier on in the discussion that you know that the ayah are there where Allah says this is a book made clear, easy to understand, the fact that you need so much external sources to understand the book that's supposed to be clear and easy to understand, does that not trouble you?
Oh, that's like it's a great. I mean, that question is asked all the time. Like, I mean, it's a common question. You see that if the Quran is supposed to be for everyone and it's supposed to be clear for everyone to understand, then what would be the need? Why would there be so much difference of opinion, etc.? But the general understanding, and I'm just giving you this, is that the main message and like the core of the Quran, that's like it's easy to get from the Quran. There's no doubt here. Yes, these other juristic opinions and that they differ quite greatly, but those are what we call subsidiary matters and not really in the core essence. The essential message of the Quran is not really hard to understand or follow. That's what I would say to it.
Okay, hopefully you're going to be with us on this journey, because when you say that the core of the Quran, the message, we would love to know what the core of the Quran and the message is. Thus far, we've not heard Allah tell us what the core of the Quran or the message is thus far, and we're already in our third chapter. And after doing a particularly long one like Al-Baqarah, we haven't really got much from that. So I'm looking forward to your input and helping us understand what the core of the Quran is and what Allah's message is.
Yeah, no, okay, go ahead.
Anyway, shall we carry on forward with more ayah, or shall we?
We've still got a bit to do here, I think, before we carry on to the next verse. I think there's still a few concerns here. Stops, do you want to voice yours first?
Well, my question is, why would you have this? Why would you have a Quran that is supposed to give you guidance? Why do you have a book by God that says, okay, listen, I've created you, and here are my rules and regulations, terms and conditions. I've laid them out for you. And if you do what is in this book, then you are on a good path over to getting a huge reward. And then it says, no. I've hidden things for you. I've made things very unclear for you. and you don't know if you're going to get to paradise. You will never know if you're going to get the reward. And on top of which, I've hidden sentences somewhere in the book which are, where it's possible to interpret them the wrong way. And if you make a mistake, I'm going to punish you for eternity in hell. Does that make sense?
No, I understand what you're trying to get at. I'd say that it's not so much as like I don't know if you're doing it on purpose, but like it's not like he's trying to like hidden some verses or something. It's just that in a general everyday sense, many things can be taken in many different ways, and this is just simply a warning against that. Now, when it comes to like religion itself and fanaticism, like emerges, then people have a way of like reading into text in ways that they shouldn't be read into. This is simply a warning against that. And I don't know much more that I can say to that. That it's not that the book itself is like something so confusing, but rather that where there is a possibility of multiple interpretation, as there is with any language, then this is just simply a warning against that. I don't think I can say much more than that.
Ishmael, was it God's intention for this book to be clear, or was it his intention for only certain verses to be clear and others to be unclear, such that only he would have the quote proper interpretation?
Well, if you're looking at the verses, like say the first verse of the surah, then that was like the idea there was definitely for only some people, for God to know only, and for everyone else to simply submit to that, to just say I believe.
Yeah, why would God put something in that only he would know? It's like me putting in a special code that like something that nobody can crack. Why would I put that in there? Especially if I don't want them to sow discord. So, for example, if I put something in there, and I know that people will try and crack it, and the fact that they might crack it, they'll have different ideas about what it might mean. Maybe it's the entry to the safe at the Bank of England, or maybe it's the Federal Reserve Bank, and this is likely for them to try and crack this and then go do an evil deed. If I didn't have that in my book, right, then they would not get the idea to go and do these things. So what's your thought on this, that there are these unclear verses that he knows are unclear to us? He's the only one that does know them. What's the point of having them in the book?
Okay. So the first, well, I mean, when it comes to mutashabih, like there's two types. One is like, okay, the one we're discussing currently is the first, those letters that no one knows the meaning. The intent of that was simply to show, like, as you know, this was revealed to the Arabs, and the whole point was that they were great in language, and this was to show them that they couldn't, etc., etc. And this was just another, how would we say, another brick in that whole work to show them that they don't have that mastery over the language. Now, I know your question wouldn't necessarily refer to this, because there's no way you can interpret letters, but the other verses where there are multiple interpretations and you say people can go and interpret them in this, well, then this is the whole point of this verse, to tell them not to delve into those verses which they can't understand, but the scholars and people who do understand, they can will be able to understand.
Okay, so two things on that. One, if these verses can only be understood by God, what's the point of having scholars? Because the scholars can't understand it. But let me go back here to the verse so that we just remember what we're saying here, right? Here it says, and no one knows its true interpretation except Allah. So would you agree, if we're using our logic and rationality, that by that standard, these allegorical verses cannot be understood by the scholars? It is impossible. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, like, I mean, like, this is talking about now, like, those letters, Alif Lam Mim, no one knows.
No, well, it's not specific about that. It just says unspecific over there, and it says allegorical if you use Yusuf Ali. So unspecific, allegorical, whichever, right? Because it's not just the ALM, right? There's other things as well. I think you'd agree that it's not just those things that are unspecific, right?
But like, as I mentioned earlier, it's those things, and where the attributes of God are mentioned, with the human was like a, what we say, anthropomorphical, like background,
arms, hands, all that sort of stuff, right?
So it's when it comes to that, and there's no doubt that only God knows the meaning, the true meaning of that, and the letters as well. That is understood.
But then the question is, would you agree? Because it says it here clearly in the Quran, so presumably you accept every verse and every sentence in the Quran. I'm highlighting it on the screen there. And no one knows its true interpretation except Allah. So, and what they're referring to here specifically is the unspecific verses, right? And no one knows the interpretation. So by that light, right, you would agree that it is impossible, it is humanly impossible for any scholar to understand those verses. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah. I do agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So the only thing then that, again, if we just use our logical thinking, the only thing the scholars could understand is those verses which are precise, or to use the other term here, basic or fundamental, if you look at the two translations I have on screen. So the only thing the scholars can know about is those verses which are precise and fundamental, correct?
Yep. Yeah. Just to give one more rider here, that's if we're talking to those verses mean like the letters and the attributes of Allah, then yeah, that's what you're saying is 100% correct. There's no issue in what you're saying.
But if something is precise or basic and fundamental, would you not agree that we can all understand that? It doesn't require scholars to understand the basic or fundamental verses or the precise verses because they are self-evident.
Yeah, you wouldn't. They'd be self-evident in the main message, but as I said, you need a scholar in terms of like exactly what it refers to, the context, these sort of things. It's not that you need a scholar.
Why do you need a scholar? If they are, because remember, they are precise and they are verses, and it is verses basic or fundamental of established meaning, right? Presumably the established meaning is by God himself, because if it was established by humans, I think you would agree that they could make a mistake. So if they are established or they're precise or fundamental, then God has done that, because that's the only way you could get to that position. Every human is fallible, including Muhammad and anybody else, right? So to get them there, those verses would have been established by Allah himself, in which case, if they are and they're precise, then we don't require scholars. So when you say we need an interpretation, that doesn't seem to make sense in light of these verses having been made basic, fundamental, or precise by Allah himself for the express purpose of human beings to understand. So the scholars seem to be entirely superfluous unless you can explain where they come into play, because you did agree that they cannot, they can say nothing about unspecific verses because only Allah knows. So we rule out all unspecific verses. So all we have left is the precise or specific verses, and he's established what's right and wrong. Therefore, what's the purpose of a scholar?
Yeah, okay, just one more. Okay, let me just first explain where the scholar would come in. But I don't know. There's another interpretation to the verse I'm looking at. It's a common one, but we'll go to that later. So the verse, it would be all clear, and the Quran is revealed for the whole of mankind. It's a guidance for the whole of mankind. So obviously, every verse, besides those mutashabih verses, every person would be able to get like a good understanding of it, like know what's God's message, etc. But to derive juristic opinions from it, that would be the job of the scholar. And to jurisprudence, the scholars will only be able to do that because of knowing the language. And
do you think, okay, cool, so your view is that where the scholars come in is not to try and understand the precise verses because they're already precise and they're self-evident, so scholars are not required for that. So your view is that where scholars are required is to interpret the verses in a way to set forth jurisprudence. Is that your view?
Yeah, but okay. I just want to throw forth. I know it might now change the whole scenario, and I'm literally not making this up. But the lesser, the more majority opinion is the one that's taken in this translation. But another very strong opinion is that the way it reads, and no one knows its true interpretation besides Allah and those who are firm in knowledge. That's another way of interpreting it. And then there's a whole another. I know it might just like throw off whatever we've discussed, but I thought I'd mention it. I think it'll be in Ibn Kathir as well. That's another. Some scholars.
How did they get their knowledge? How did they get their knowledge?
No,
and
those.
Who is it that's knowledgeable? Is there a criteria that can establish the knowledgeable from the unknowledgeable? Because somebody can claim to be an imam, somebody can claim to be a scholar, or whatever the case is. How do we establish that they are?
No. Well, at the time it was revealed, it would be that those who were closer to the Prophet, etc., like the closer companions, etc., they would be able to say that. But I think we just go with the first interpretation. I just put that out there because I'm reading it currently, and I thought it was interesting. It's a different take on the whole verse. But the generally accepted one is what these translations have taken. Oh well, if you look at the second translation, Yusuf Ali, like basically what the second interpretation of this is, where that full stop is, they just take out the full stop, because in the Arabic language the full stops aren't there, so they just take out the full stop. And where it says say, they make it saying. So it would read, but no one knows its hidden meanings except Allah and those who are firmly grounded in knowledge, whilst they say we believe in the book. it's a secondary interpretation. I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I think again bringing in secondary interpretations, which aren't even in these interpretations, again, it sort of it's a little bit self-defeating, right? Because if
No,
that's
yeah, I understand.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think let's stay with the primary things here, because I think
Yeah,
that's much more important.
Yeah.
So your view is that your view is mostly that the scholars are there to interpret jurisprudence. So my question really is, why didn't God put down this jurisprudence in a clear set of books that requires no interpretation, and the jurisprudence is clear? Because presumably you would agree that he's capable of doing that, right? So first we've got to agree that. If you said it's not possible for him to do that, okay, now we can discuss that. But if you agree that if he revealed this, he could have revealed a set of jurisprudence that would be, for want of a better word, precise, perfect, fundamental, basic, in such a way that the jurisprudence would be available to all of us, right? You agree that's possible?
Yeah. No. Okay, I know where you're going with this. So I'll just say my answer to the whole thing would be that yes, while it is possible, well, obviously it's possible. I mean, if you look at the books of jurisprudence, I mean, they're like extremely vast. Like I know, okay, maybe you could say God could reveal it in one volume or something, but the two things to understand about jurisprudence. One is, if there's a difference of opinion in jurisprudence, it's not a big deal. Like your belief has to be correct, one God, Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But if maybe your method of reading prayer, your method of praying or something, you derived it differently, it's not a big deal. So that was left open for interpretation. One, because it's not like, I wouldn't say it's not important, but it's not like the biggest thing in the world, and because the difference of opinions is accepted. And secondly, because the jurisprudence really covers every single aspect of a believer's life, like in incredible detail. And I wouldn't say that obviously it's not impossible, but it would be I don't know what's cumbersome to have that as in Revelation.
So you feel it would be cumbersome. Would you agree that human jurisprudence at the moment hasn't covered every single aspect that humans could possibly be involved in? You would agree that as well, right? So at the moment, the Islamic jurisprudence is not complete. You'd agree that, yes?
In which way? I could agree.
In the sense that they have not foreseen every single interaction or issue that could come up in human interactions or existence. Correct?
No, but yeah. No, that's a given. But
all right. So it's incomplete in the sense that jurisprudence is currently incomplete and probably would be for all time. And yet God could have produced a complete jurisprudence that might have been, what was the word you used? Cumbersome. Okay, so let me ask you the question then, Ishmael, if I may. Would you prefer, as a scholar of Islam, to have what you consider a cumbersome, complete jurisprudence from God directly, or would you prefer, I would suggest, a cumbersome, incomplete version from current jurisprudence scholars? Which would you prefer if you were a Muslim?
I did say that it is incomplete in the sense that obviously the Quran didn't speak about things like loans and finance and how would you deal with it,
or playing if you're on the space station orbiting the Earth.
Yeah. Or things like that there. But or even basic ones like on the plane, what do you do on the plane, like etc. It's always a big story. But the thing about that the Quran did was set down certain principles which the jurists use, and now they've developed laws for these specific things. They've developed laws for all of these things using the same principles. And like what I'd say is, I mean, the practicality of the whole thing, like a whole massive volume of every single thing you could ever do coming down. I mean, I know it's possible, and obviously we're talking about God here, so it's all possible. But I mean, really thinking about it, that wouldn't be the best way. It'd probably be better just principles, and man can continue from there. And if there is a difference of opinion, it is accepted in jurisprudence. The difference of opinion is well accepted. I mean, people read the prayer.
I agree that it may be well accepted to have a difference of opinion. I think that's self-defeating if you want to come to an answer, right? And I think further to that, if you had a jurisprudence that required no interpretation or discussion, then we could all accept that, right? It's coming from God and it's perfect. And we test it and we, wow, this is amazing, right? Every single thing, we just have to look up to find out what's the case. If we're in doubt, we have a source that we can go to. At the moment, we have human beings interpreting things and disagreeing with each other and then claiming that their disagreements, that's all part and parcel of it.
Yeah, well, okay. I think self-defeating would be to have a book coming down in the 14th century telling you how to pray in the space station. Wouldn't that be self-defeating?
Why not?
Because the
He
whole
knew that was going to
like,
happen, right?
yeah, no, that's true. But I'm saying like the whole principle is if like, how do I explain this now? Like there's a verse in the chapter 7, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's called the cattle. I'm not Baqarah. There's another one, the livestock or whatever. So there, where it says that the people were like demanding that why don't like the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is coming with this message, but we don't see any proof from him. Why don't angels just come down and then we'd know and then we'd submit and then it'll all be over? So those were the things people were saying. And then in response to that, God says, well, if that had to happen, if something so obvious and clear had to just immediately come, then the whole point of the test of life would be gone and the matter would be decided and judgment day would just come, because the whole point of this test would then be gone.
Okay, okay, but I think that's a separate example, because if you are going to judge somebody and punish them for a test, surely the rules need to be crystal clear. And if the rules are not crystal clear, then the person who fails the test has a legitimate complaint against the person that set up the test. Would you agree?
Yes, that's why, as I said, like it's not only commonly known amongst the jurors, but the Messenger himself in the hadith has mentioned that a person who makes ijtihad, meaning applies himself to try and get a juristic understanding of from the Quran and hadith, and he fails, he's still rewarded and it's still fine. He's not going to be punished for that. And if all the future events that could happen were specifically noted exactly as they were in the Quran, then I mean, who wouldn't believe in the Quran then? Would it be a test? That's what I was trying to get.
I'm not even at the we're not even at the stage of the Quran making precise predictions. What I am saying is that at least the jurisprudence could have taken into effect every single thing. And I did ask you, and I didn't hear an answer from you. Which would you prefer? What you considered a cumbersome but complete jurisprudence directly from God that you could refer to with the knowledge that this is without doubt and without interpretation, the understanding or the way to conduct yourself in different scenarios. You still have the free choice not to conduct yourself that way. Would you prefer that sort of jurisprudence, or the one you currently have, which is incomplete, in which there is, to use your words, vast disagreement among scholars? Which one would you prefer to have as a practicing Muslim?
Okay, and for the way you described it, it made it seem like obvious I'd take the first one. But let me explain why I take this one here any day. It's because the principles here are set out in the Quran and the Hadith, and from there a scholar who's qualified can simply take it and apply it to any situation, wherever it might be in the world, where situations differ, and can get a different ruling and it will still be correct. Whereas if we had one thing, and then that one thing would have to mention the ruling in this country and that country where the conditions are different, which is like, I know it is possible and we're talking about possibility and it is possible, but can you really imagine, can you really fathom, do you know how big that book would have to be? I mean, I'm not joking, but I'm just saying, like, it's like you wouldn't even.
Okay,
like,
but would the book be any bigger than all the interpretations and all the jurisprudence that's come up? Because presumably, if you had to go and look at all of those put together, they are pretty big anyway. And humans came to some sort of interpretation, right? So it seems to me God could have done that easily, more precisely than humans would have done, and there would have been an answer as to what do you do in the northern hemisphere, in Sweden, for example, when the sun never sets, right? How do you pray? How do you do Ramadan, etc., or on the space station or whatever else? At the moment, scholars have to make up stuff. Literally, they're making stuff up, right? Because it's not in the Quran, it's not in the Hadith. They are going, how do we solve this problem that was never given to us? We've got to make something up here. So let's make something up and then try and justify it afterwards. And if you try and look at any of that stuff, it's just subjective opinion. So the question is, would you prefer their subjective opinions that they've got to make up, or would you have preferred God to give you a clear jurisprudence as to what to do if you visited Sweden? Which one would you prefer?
Yeah, now this is, I know it's a similar line of questioning, but now we're talking about one specific issue, and obviously anyone would like clarity on any issue. But as I said, okay, and the scholars are not just making things up, although it might seem like that. That's not allowed. You have to base it on some principle from the Quran or the Hadith, and that's what they're trying. And if they whatever they do come to, that's taken to be. If you're following that scholar, that's taken to be what you have to follow. It's not, and the whole thing is that you're not going to be punished if you follow that scholar and he turned out to be wrong. It's like, that's not so.
Okay, but what happens if you follow one scholar and he disagrees with another scholar, and I come along and I look at the two scholars and I go, okay, which scholar do I follow? Because presumably the Quran is not clear enough for me to get an interpretation, right? It requires somebody else which I think we've established is, well, from my point of view, I don't think you've established is strong. Even if we went with your jurisprudence thing, which I think isn't particularly strong, because God could have sorted that out entirely. But let's assume we were charitable and said, okay, we're going to go with your jurisprudence side of it. Now you have two scholars that disagree on certain jurisprudence. One follows this one follows that one. I come along, I'm not following either of them. I want to know what do I need to do in Sweden? How do I establish what to do?
Okay, well, I'll just tell you what we generally do, and you can apply it there. Like, so if following a madhab, I'm sure like Hanafi, Shafi, whatever, etc. So within that madhab, there'll be like it'd differ in opinion to say the Shafi madhab. Maybe like, for example, the prayer time would be different, etc. So I'm following my madhab, and within that madhab now, in a new issue like this here, I'd be choose one. What can I say? One jurist, and that's who's like currently living, and follow his opinions, and that's it.
Okay.
And that's like,
yeah, no, I appreciate that. How do you distinguish? How do you discern which one to follow?
no, that's the thing. Like any reputable jurist who's in my area, like where, okay, say I'm in Durban here in Sherwood, so there's a lot of jurists in this. I don't know if you can call them jurists. We have Arabic terms for them, but I just choose him, and whatever in these issues where there's a lot of conflict, whatever decision he makes, I just follow that. That's because I'm still a student, so I don't know anything. So I just follow whatever he says, and the majority of people.
Why would you do that though? Why would you follow whatever he says?
No, because he's okay. He's well equipped to understand and.
Well, how do you know that though? Because if somebody else disagrees with him, how do you establish which one to follow? Or do you just throw a dice? Or is it the one that closest lives to you, the one that you sort of get on with because you like the way he says things? What differentiates? If I follow a scientist or a number of scientists, and I really wanted to go and look into things and they disagreed, I try and go and find the overwhelming consensus and try and understand the evidence and go, okay, there's more evidence for this view than that view. It's more reasonable to take that view. You are not in a position to do that. So how do you differentiate which scholar to take?
No, well, actually, that's what the Salafi movement of today does. I'm sure you're familiar. I know you at Speaker's Corner, so most of those guys are the Salafi movement today, and they generally do that. They exactly what you say. They go look at the evidence and they try and see whose side is stronger and whatever. But
but
generally,
I'm asking about you, because you said you don't know. You're just learning and you just follow what he tells you.
Yeah, I know the majority of lay people, like, I know he's a scholar, he's been through the mill, he studied, and I don't look at, like, say, I wouldn't say that, okay, on this issue, I choose this scholar, on that issue, I choose that scholar, because then how would you decide? It would be impossible.
Exactly. How do you decide?
Yeah.
That's my question to you.
But from the beginning, I choose one, and I just follow him. I don't know what's the word in English.
How did you choose him? What did you do to choose him? I'm interested in your thought process as to how you choose a scholar to follow. What was it that you did? What did you think in your head to go, okay, I'm following this guy?
Oh, well, okay, I'll just give you that quickly. So basically, it'd have to be someone you can communicate with on a daily basis, someone who you know to be knowledgeable because he studied all of these things, and someone who follows your madhab, etc. So there's probably about 10 different people I could have followed. And in reality, I just chose the person who was easiest for me to contact. So in case I had some query, I could just ask him. That's just how I went. And if I chose any one of them, no one would have a problem. Some follow others, some follow. But generally, they agree, because like it's one area we generally agree on most things. But some things like, can we eat prawns, can't we eat prawns, slight disagreements. So half the people would eat, half would
Ishmael,
eat.
do you think you can get one of the scholars onto the show?
That's almost impossible. No, I don't think.
I just thought I'd ask, right? Because if they have all this knowledge, we want to speak to them, right? Firstly, I want to see, can they think rationally? You know, can they answer the critical questions that we are asking here, which you may not necessarily be equipped to do.
But what questions? I mean, I would, if that happened, then I don't know. I would go and ask them. But now, I mean, they would never come on the show. But I mean, I'd go and ask them if I didn't know something.
Why would they not come and share the message? Are they not supposed to do dawah?
No, well, I mean, they wouldn't see this as the best form. I mean, like, yeah, they wouldn't see this as the best form of dawah to do. But I mean, if you do have a question, you can. It's not like I don't know anything, but I'm saying I'm not.
You don't know anything, but I'm not saying. I would say, and you would agree that you're not as well equipped as the scholars you follow, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think I've monopolized a lot of time, and my co-panelists have been extremely patient, and I yield the floor to them. Guys, if you'd like to carry on, or if you want to move on, I'm entirely fine. And I do thank you for your patience, Ismail, and the patience of my co-panelists and everybody watching.
No problem. It's nice to converse and think about these things.
Maybe my colleagues have gone and had some tea or fallen
No,
asleep. I
I'm
hope
still
not.
here. No, I'm
Okay,
here now.
no.
I'm enjoying this. No.
I didn't want to feel like I'm doing everything here and you guys aren't doing anything. I mean, I could carry on for a while. Yeah, I feel like some of the responses you've given me, we could still discuss further on. As you might imagine, I'm not necessarily entirely satisfied. If you give me an answer that I am satisfied with, I'll say to you, okay, Ishmael, that's a reasonable position. I may or may not agree with it, and we can move on. I don't think I'm there with this verse. I think this verse, but having discussed what we've discussed so far, I'll move on, and I will still have severe problems with this verse. And I don't, to my ear, obviously, I haven't heard something that's sufficiently reasonable for me to accept as a reasonable possibility, or probability more so. Anything's possible, right? So reasonable probability would be the way I would put it, especially given the way we've looked at this verse and what you've said about the scholars and so forth. So,
And a question from the chat regarding
sure.
the scholars. What happens if you have two scholars which give you opposing interpretations?
Yeah, I did ask that. I'm not sure how. I don't remember specifically what Ishmael said on that, though. Ishmael, maybe you can just repeat, because I did ask you that originally. So
yeah,
maybe
you did ask me that. No, so
again.
I basically said that I like from the beginning, we just following one of them, and if someone has an opposing view in every issue, we're following one to be consistent, because otherwise, how are you going to choose who do you follow? It's just going to end up being like your desire. Like you want to eat prawns, so you follow this guy, and then you don't want to do this, so you follow that guy. So you just choose one and you follow all the way through.
Yeah, but how do you choose?
He just said, it sounds to my ear, Ishmael, like you're doing it subjectively. You have some wants and desires prior to deciding on a scholar. Then you look at what the scholars say. And if they are in line with your previous wants and desires, you're more likely to follow them.
No, that's
you use the word prawns, right? So if you like prawns and the scholar says it's okay to eat prawns, you're more likely to follow him because he's saying that you can do something that you already wanted to do.
Yeah, but the whole thing is that from the beginning you have to be consistent, and the whole thing that we're trying to prevent is this me choosing based on my desire. That's the whole thing. We're trying to get away from that. So you choose one, and in one issue he may be lax, and in another issue he may be on the other side, which you don't like, but you just have to follow through with it.
Okay, so stops when, if I remember now, what he said is he chooses a scholar based on his madhab. We obviously can ask the question, how does he know what madhab? How does he choose his madhab? Maybe he's born into it. So it's choosing the madhab. It's choosing the one that he can communicate with, and I think that was close enough to have the conversations. I think those are some of the criteria you gave.
Yeah, and the madhab is in the majority. I mean, in South Africa, everyone's a Hanafi, so well in Durban. So I mean, your family.
You've not looked into the other madhabs then.
No, that'll be later on in studying. I basics here and there, but not. I can't say I know any of the other madhabs well at all.
Because you haven't really chosen this madhab, you've been born into it, or it's been part of your community, so you've just accepted it, but you haven't looked at the other ones as yet.
No, not really. I know basic things, but I haven't looked into them.
Can I ask a question?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, no problem.
Ismail, I've been listening to you talk to Robs, and I appreciate the answers that you've given. I've enjoyed the discussion. But there seems to be a common default for you. You rely on what your teacher says, you rely on other people's interpretations, and you rely on the scholars rather than your own conclusions yourself. Okay. Do you not see that as being a bit alarming, that your faith is based on the opinions of others rather than any conclusions of your own?
Well, okay, so I like that you use the word faith there. So the faith itself, that's it's based purely on whatever I think and whatever I've thought about, etc. And when it comes to the way what you're going to eat and how you're going to pray and these things, then while I do look into the matters because I happen to be studying it, but I don't I just follow the madhab, or I follow the mufti. And I mean, I know that you might say, okay, it's just like a sheep mentality, but this is only in this aspect of jurisprudence, etc. In terms of other things how should Islam be portrayed, how should dawah be done, and these other things out of jurisprudence, then I obviously have my own opinions. But as a student, you wouldn't really try and make your own thing as such. But in terms of belief, I think about that on my own, in terms of how things should be viewed and how things should be understood. I do that on my own.
Can you give examples of how you allow your thinking and your Islam to be what you conclude. Can you give an example, maybe? Because I asked for that because listening to your discussion with Rob's, it seems that 90% of your thinking is, and I don't really mean to be rude, but sheep-like, and your imam and the scholars are your shepherds, and they pretty much guide, coerce, and influence your thinking more so than Allah, who, in his own book, in a book made clear, easy to understand, you should be coming to those conclusions yourself rather than this default reliance on third-party interpretations.
Yeah, okay. So we have to like divide it into, now, as I said, like the way I pray, like I'm not gonna really go too much into that. And I didn't really like, I just pray as everyone prayed. Obviously I looked at the different proofs and whatever, but I didn't, because this is not something I consider to be fundamental. I know the scholars have gone through it, they've come to their opinion, I just follow it, and I'm in conformity with everyone else. But when it comes to things like what does Islam say about jihad, and how Islam was spread, and what does Islam say about certain things, and the Quran, and which I read on my own, and I do my own. I read the Quran every day, and I understand it because I can understand Arabic now, and I come to my own conclusions about things like that. And while some people, okay,
As an example, I don't mean to interrupt, but when you say like how Islam spread, I take it you're reading those points from your own Muslim sources. You're not looking at secular history to see what secular history has to say about how Islam spread. Are you just reading one source, or are you looking at both sources as to how Islam spread, and then coming to your own conclusion?
Okay, to be honest here, like, okay, but the first point would be that I'm not just relying on like what the scholars are saying. Like some scholars would say no, well, and they do say that. They say that Islam was just spread through love and like things like that. And I don't tend to accept that. But to go to your specifically what you said about now secular sources, while I do consult them, and I mean I have perused through them, but mainly if I'm reading Islamic history, I'm going to read it from Ibn Kathir. He has a nice history book. I wouldn't say I rely too much on secular sources.
So if you come across a historical narrative with reference to Islam that challenges, your Islamic sources, and the secular history has, if you like, proofs or evidences to support the statements it's making about Islam, what do you do then? I'll give you an example. Just an example. I don't want to go off topic, but let's say, for instance, the evidence for Mecca before and after Muhammad. There are two historical points on that. So where would you go with that when history testifies to Mecca not being in existence before Muhammad? But your scholars will say it was. But there's no historical evidence that Mecca existed before Muhammad. What would you do then?
Well, see, if it was purely like what my scholars were saying and what secular history that's reliable had to say, that would be slightly different. But I mean, in this case, because the Quran speaks about it and Hadith speaks about it, then it's no real, like, you can understand that, I'm sure, from my perspective. Quran says it, Hadith says it, and I go in that direction. Obviously, if it were a different issue now, let's just say it's an imaginary issue, and the scholars, just like scholars of their own opinion, are telling me one thing, and there's no proof for it, and say like secularism in terms of its sciences, like let's say evolution. So I mean,
I get that, but you just mentioned the point. You've got it there, which is what I wanted to get you to, and particularly with the verse that we've been discussing. You've just said that if the Quran and Hadith say it, so then you'll go with it, irrespective of what any external source may testify to. So if history, archaeology, and testimony say that Mecca did not exist, but the Quran and Hadith say, yes, they did. Yes, it does. Or did in Muhammad's time and before, you will say you'll go with the Quran and Hadith, irrespective of what evidence is presented before you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like this topic, I've never really gone into it at all, and I know you just bring it up to see what's my opinion on things, but I can't imagine that the historical evidence. Well, okay, I'll have to look into it. I'm taking your word for it now that they say there was no Mecca. Obviously the place itself still existed, and the Quran and the Hadith does say that there was no one living there. It was a dead town until Abraham, etc., came there. And so I'd believe that. And it's historical records, the lack of historical records is not necessarily evidence against it.
Okay, so for instance, when you find ayah in the Quran that teaches that Muhammad split the moon, irrespective of what external evidences there are or lack of, you'll just go with what the Quran teaches on that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, like, I haven't come across a place yet where I really had to, like, I know last time you brought up Zulqarnain, I mean, what you call Alexander or whatever we're going to translate it as, but I mean, I haven't really come across a place where I'd had to really choose when it comes to Quran and science. Obviously, when it comes to what the scholars say, and science, yeah, there's a whole lot to choose from then. Then
But
it's
why would you need the scholars to help you interpret what the Quran teaches about science?
no, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, when what I see the Quran saying and science, I didn't really have any problems. I didn't have too many problems. But when the scholars' interpretation,
So embryology in the Quran, you accept as the embryology in the Quran is one of the testimonies of the authenticity of the Quran coming from a divine source.
yeah, I'll be honest. I looked into that. I read now. Obviously, Keith Moore. I know there's some thing
Keith
because
Moore.
he was influenced, etc., whatever. And I read what I could, but I couldn't come to a decent enough conclusion on that. I mean, I know. Okay, that's as much as I can say. I did read that.
You cite Keith Moore, but there are other embryologists like P.Z. Myers and many others who challenge that. But because Keith Moore is more inclined or has been backed by Muslims as someone who testifies against the integrity of the Quran, you'll go along with him, though somewhat you're 50-50 on it. Yeah, you can have 10 other embryologists challenge, laugh, mock the testimony of the Quran and its claim of embryology, and you'll think that's just their prejudice and bias against the Quran.
Well, I watched an interview with P.Z. Myers, and he didn't, although yes, as you mentioned, he did seem to mock, but he didn't necessarily go. He more seemed to make the case that Aristotle and things knew about it. Well, I don't know. It was just an interview I was watching with him, and he seemed to make that case instead of mocking. So I admit I didn't do too much of research into it, but
he did mock it because he said it was laughable. So I would say if someone is making a statement of a text that's in the Quran as laughable, I would say that is mocking it. Yeah.
No, the one I
interview too.
Should we try and stay on this verse itself there?
That's what I wanted to get to, because when it says there are things like that are ambiguous or interpreted and such. Well, when it flies in when you look at secular history or the sciences, you're saying you're going to take them as a reality, though reality in effect testifies against the narrative that's found in the Quran. So
okay, so if we're talking about history, I mean, I know as much as it's reliable, but I mean, a lack of history, it's not really going to convince me. I'm sure you can understand that. Like, if you talk about sciences and evolution and maybe the world being around,
I don't believe in evolution. I believe in intelligent design. So you're not atheist here. I believe in intelligent design. So we don't need to go on that road. I'm talking about what the Quran teaches. So when it flies in the face of, say, for instance, history or science, do you take that as allegorical then? Or do you take that as literal?
No, I haven't come across a verse which we've taken as okay. Maybe we have, like, maybe if you could say that, like, maybe certain verses which seem to give the impression of the sun rising, etc., were taken not to be in the literal sense because of scientific knowledge. But I mean, that maybe that's the furthest I can go to say I've taken allegorical meaning where the literal was possible. No, I don't think I've done that.
So, for instance,
talking ants,
or the Solomon and the Hoopy bird, or I mean, I can go on with stories like maybe some in the Hadith as well. Then, I mean, would you, if something was found in the Hadith that challenges science or history?
Why don't you make it short? If you are confronted with a sentence that says that a bird cannot fly on its own, but it needs a god to hold it up in the air, do you take that as something that is true, that is correct?
Yeah, I mean, like I know the verse you're talking about is in Surah 69. I can't remember exactly which first number, but now there you might say that I'm taking the allegorical meaning. You might say that because well, you'd say, well, the bird is flapping, that's why it's going. But I mean, it's kind of obvious that no one's literally holding it up, so the allegorical meaning is the only one accepted. It's got nothing to do with scientific you know, the progress in science. I mean, that's just anyone looking at it knows that the bird is flapping, and because of that, that's the outward way of why it's staying up. It's that science doesn't really come in there.
So if it's allegorical and then only Allah knows the meaning, if it's allegorical and only Allah knows the meaning, the whole account of the bird being held up by Allah has no meaning at all and no place in the Quran at all. So it's a waste.
Oh no, I didn't mean it allegorical as in the verse we're talking about. I meant it as as not that literal, like the opposite of literal, like metaphorical and literal, in that God is holding it up because he designed the laws of gravity and the laws of the Bernoulli effect and whatever that they use to keep afloat. And I didn't mean it like allegorical as the verse, the opposite of literal. That's what I was talking about. Like, it's not like you can see God literally holding it up. You know what I'm saying?
Literal is figurative.
Oh, yeah, figurative. That sure, you're right there. So I should have said that.
Okay, so just to conclude on, just because I don't want to labor this point anymore. So when we come across the ayah in the Quran that teaches that Muhammad split the moon in half, and that flies in the face of logic, or it flies in the face of any history or any historian recording the single most greatest celestial events, it's the creation of the universe, and nobody at all records it in history, you will say either the Quran, I don't care what history says or lack of commentary in history about it, I'm going to go with what the Quran says on it. Or if it kind of like seems spurious to you, you're going to say, well, that's actually allegorical anyway.
Okay, but to be clear, I haven't done that weight scene thing and I went allegorical before. And that just like in this case now is a new case. I haven't done that before. Here in this case, to be precise, the Quran says that the hour is drawing close and the moon has split. The Quran it doesn't really say that Muhammad split the moon or whatever. Although I'm not going to try and hide things. That is what you'd find in the Hadith traditions, that it did happen in the early years when he was in Makkah. He did split the moon. It's in the Hadith. The Quran just mentions that the moon will be or was split.
Actually, okay.
No, I've memorized the Quran, so I'm just saying. But I'm not like trying to correct you. I'm just putting it into perspective. And in that case, I'd admit that there's nothing in history to show that it did happen. And you might say, well, then that there should be someone who would have seen it, and it might seem unlikely. But if the Quran says it, then I would believe it, and I'm not going to hide behind the fact that it might seem.
Ayah 54 verses 1 and 2.
Yeah. Same.
So it's a Quranic doctrine. But anyway, so what you're saying is then.
No, I did say it's in the Quran, but I said it doesn't mention about Muhammad splitting it or anything. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hour has come close and the moon has been split. That it just mentions that in the first verse.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Ismail.
But
No
the
problem.
point is, if you see something in reality and it says the opposite of the Quran, which do you give preference to?
That is an extremely interesting question. So I've discussed this before. So like let's just say in the Quran it had to, for example, for argument's sake, say 1 + 1 is equal to 3. Like let's just say it had to say that. Then in that case, because let's call it, although it's mathematics here, or let's say it was something that's scientifically 100% so sure of. I don't know if you can use the world being round, for example, in this case, because of flat earthers, but something like, the science is 100% sure on, and the Quran goes otherwise, then yes, you are right there that we would then say that the Quran is trying to say something else. That would be the what would happen in that case.
It will need
I don't understand what did you say now?
Oh, okay. I know. I meant like if there's like something like what we call qat'i, meaning like in terms of logic or maths or science, it's indisputable, and the Quran seems to be saying something against that, then the Quran would be interpreted in that case in having an allegorical meaning. If that was the case, that is generally the principle that's used.
How does that rescue you?
No, meaning that if the literal meaning of that verse is going against indisputable logic or science, then the figurative would be taken. That's like,
Yeah, I
I'm
understand that.
just,
But how does that rescue you? If the Quran says 1 + 1 = 3, how does that rescue you if you say, well, that's allegorical? If it's
oh,
not.
like, I mean, this is example. I don't like, I can't, I don't have something specific here, but I'm just trying to like
Okay,
show you what the principle.
I've
do
got
you see
something on
can you see the screen that Rob has just brought up?
Oh yeah,
Surah
yeah,
4:11, Surah 4:12. That's about inheritance. Do you
yeah.
take
Are you
that
going to
as
say that it doesn't
allegorical, or
equal
do you
to
take
one?
that as literal?
Or you're going to say it doesn't equal to 1? It
Yes.
doesn't like yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
That, for me, my friend, is a knockdown error. It's impossible
no,
for you to answer this, but I want you to try your best.
no. Okay, I mean, I'm still going to study that in 2 years' time, but I mean, it's like a huge subject, the law of inheritance, and when it
No,
when
I'm
it
not
equals
talking
to,
about, hang on, Ishmael, we're not talking about the whole inheritance. We're talking about a specific area in the Quran that is
no,
mathematical. And you said if it's mathematical, you must take it allegorically, in which
yeah,
case these two verses, by your lights,
yeah,
must be allegorical.
no, I was getting, I wasn't like trying to go into the whole subject. I was just saying that in the subject, many times, because it's based on basically these ayat and maybe 1 or 2 other hadith, then they come to times where the numerator is more than the denominator, and they simply just use that, and I'm not sure exactly what they do, but I think Muhammad Hijab has a video on it where he explains
Yes,
it.
we know that,
I'm
and
sure-
he's wrong.
yeah, but I also, someone said that that's not exactly how they do it, from what I understand. But I can definitely find out for you and come back to you next week with the exact answer. But
Yeah.
I've asked this exact question to my friend, because I asked him that, so if the top is more, what happens? And he I don't know, he explained it to me at the time, but I'll explain it to you next week. I mean,
Okay,
it's like
do it next week. Ishmael, can you write something down there? Are you able to remember something?
okay, I'll remember it.
Okay, so be very clear about what we're asking here, right? In
Yeah,
these
yeah,
two verses, under
yeah.
certain circumstances, the inheritance adds up to more than 100% or more than 1 if you're using fractions.
Yeah,
You would
yeah.
agree that if an inheritance is more than 1 or more than 100%, that is impossible, correct?
No, well, in what do you like?
If
So if you
if I die, I can only give away 100% or a total of 1 of my entire inheritance. It is impossible for me to give away more than what I own, correct?
yeah, well, that statement you said was correct.
That's a mathematical impossibility. Good.
Right.
Now, you would agree, as you've stated yourself, that under certain circumstances, these two verses taken together, there's circumstances where if a man dies and he has a certain family members, that the inheritance adds up to more than 1, right? So there is
Yeah.
that in there, right? And you said the scholars read it and they do X, Y, and Z. Here's the problem that I'd like you to go away and come back with. You agree that the scholars cannot change the Quran. There's a difference between interpretation and changing. If the Quran says 112%, the scholars cannot come along and say that you're going to do something else to make it 100%, because they are then modifying the Quran. There is no interpretation. This is a modification. So if the response that you come back with is next week says that the scholars do X, Y, and Z, and that equals 100%, and that differs from the Quran, then what I want you to answer now before next week is, what do you do in that case? If they are modifying the Quran, not explaining it or interpreting it, and you're a smart guy, so you know the difference. If they are modifying the Quran, which one are you going to accept, the scholars or the Quran?
Well, obviously, if they are modifying it, then we'll take the Quran. That's like the given.
Good. Okay.
But as I say, I know it's okay. I don't want to give any explanations now because I'd rather go check that. And I have asked this question before. I'll be honest, I can't remember the answer. But
okay. So, here's the thing. What you need to come back with, and I'm saying need from a point of view of anybody believing that these two verses can be, there is a solution to this. What you need to come back with something that is in line with maths, i.e. that does not go over 100% and does not contradict or modify the Quran. If you can do that, which I think is impossible, I will be very interested to hear it. So that's,
okay.
I look forward to hearing that from you next week.
Okay, I know. I understood the question totally. That's like,
okay.
Yeah.
So you can't modify the Quran, and it must obey basic maths.
Right.
Okay, good.
All right.
Ismail, I think we're on to 11 o'clock our side. It's probably, well, about the same if you're in South Africa, I guess.
Yeah, 1 hour ahead.
2 hours ahead, so
Yeah.
you're a bit late there. I do appreciate your time. We look forward to having you back on. Please do, because we will remember it. So please do come back and give us an answer for how it does not modify the Quran and does not go over 100%. If you could do those two things, my friend, and we can all accept it as a rational and reasonable answer, then I think you will have solved this and I won't ever bring this up again.
Okay, no problem.
Good.
And are you in Durbs itself?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was last up in the Mushloti. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, okay. It's a bit cold there to swim now.
Yeah.
Okay, you South Africans, you bloody South Africans, you.
Yeah.
Guys, I want to appreciate it. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all the viewers. We look forward to seeing you next week. Ishmael, we'll go on from Surah 3.8 next week. Thanks to Ishmael, our Muslim guest. Thanks to Stops and Thundrus, my co-panelists. We will also, let me just stop sharing here. If you want to join us, for those of us that will be there, if TDS Dave or if one of us can just add the link in. If you want to chat some more, Ishmael, you're more than welcome. We've got a Discord server where we go offline and people can chat, off air, so to speak. So that's available if you want to join us. I don't know if you've ever heard of or know what that is.
No, I've never done that. But can you give me the times you'll be doing that? Maybe I'll join in. But
well, we normally do it now straight after the event. I'm posting the link in the main chat, which you may not have access to, so I'll post it into the private chat here with us. That's the link to our Discord server. You can use a browser or anything like that. As I say, we're normally only on that server after the show like this. So that's normally every Friday evening for those of us who want to pop on for a while.
Well, we need to change this because what happened today was not, that's crazy.
What was that?
I still don't know what happened.
What's that?
I still don't know what happened today with the stupid hangout.
Oh,
we need to get serious with the Discord server to spend more time on there.
I'll probably only be able to do that at the end of the month. I'm pretty full up now this month, so hopefully we can look at it end of the month.
Do you have a resource that can help us set this up?
Yeah, I probably can. Let's finish off with the hadith of the day and we can chat offline about it.
Okay, I have to go, right, guys? I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Ishmael. Look forward to hearing from you next week.
Goodbye, Ishmael. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, Stops. Have you got a hadith of the day to finish us off?
Volume 1, Book 3, number 73, narrated by Abdul bin Asud. The Prophet said, "Do not wish to like anyone except in two cases. The first is a person whom Allah has given wealth and he spends it righteously. And the second one is one whom Allah has given wisdom, in other words, the Holy Quran, and he acts according to it and teaches it to others." These are the two kinds of people that you should like. A person who is rich and spends it in the right way. And the second one is who knows the Quran and teaches it to others. Those are the two people, only types of people that you should like.
Well, according to the hadith, right? But not everybody takes the hadith as being absolute guidance. Right?
Gospel truth.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, again, thank you to both of you. Interesting chatting to Ishmael. Hope to see him on next week, and I'll be very interested to hear his response with the verse. And for those of you who want to, pop onto Discord. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, 8 p.m., hopefully on time. Thank you very much, guys.
Good night,
everybody. Thumbs up quickly.
Yep, thumbs up. Thank you.